The Queen's decree echoed through the throne room, amplified by the crystalline structures that pulsed with cold, calculated energy. Douglas Williams, you will breed with my daughter, Lyra. Her genetic anomaly requires your assistance. The Queen's sapphire eyes, hard as glacial ice, fixed on him, daring him to refuse. The air crackled with unspoken threats, a silent promise of pain should he deviate from her carefully constructed plan. Douglas Williams, xenobiologist and until recently, free man, stood before the Andromedan Queen, acutely aware of the energy thrumming beneath his boots. The throne room was a symphony of alien geometry, towering crystalline formations that absorbed and refracted the pale light of Andromeda, casting long, distorted shadows across the polished floor. Andromedan soldiers, their chitinous armor gleaming like obsidian, stood motionless around the perimeter, their multi-jointed limbs poised for action. He was a prisoner captured during a research mission gone wrong, and now, this. Stunned, Douglas swallowed hard, the Queen's words echoing in his mind. Breed. He was a scientist, not a stud. Ethically, it was abhorrent. Practically, it was terrifying. He glanced at the soldiers, their alien faces impassive, and knew resistance would be futile, at least for now. Yet a spark of defiance flickered within him. The Queen, seemingly sensing his internal turmoil, leaned forward on her throne, her regal bearing radiating power. The royal lineage of Andromeda must be preserved, she stated, her voice a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the chamber. Strong heirs are essential. You see, Douglas Williams, it is in the best interest of the Andromedan society as well as your own safety to procreate with Lyra. Her offspring will be the key to uniting our species. She paused, her gaze hardening. My daughter, Lyra, unfortunately, suffers from a deficiency, a genetic anomaly, if you will. She cannot naturally produce the pheromones necessary for Andromedan mating rituals. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Douglas found his voice, though it trembled slightly. With all due respect, Your Majesty, he began, carefully choosing his words, are you suggesting forced breeding? Surely there are other, more humane options. He subtly hinted at his moral objections, a flicker of compassion for the unseen princess coloring his tone. The Queen dismissed his concerns with a wave of her hand. Sentimentality is a luxury we cannot afford. This arrangement is a matter of necessity, not choice. Furthermore, consider the benefits to humanity. Cooperation could pave the way for technological exchange, for alliances that would secure your species' future. Unseen by Douglas, a figure shifted in the shadows at the edge of the throne room. Lyra, the Andromedan princess, observed the scene with a mixture of sadness and resignation etched on her face. Her slender frame was partially concealed by a crystalline pillar, her large, gray-green eyes reflecting the cold light of the chamber. She was a pawn in her mother's game, her own desires and feelings seemingly irrelevant. Douglas absorbed the Queen's words, weighing his desire for survival against his moral compass. The promise of benefits to humanity was a tempting carrot, but the ethical implications were a bitter pill to swallow. And what of Lyra? He asked, his voice gaining strength. What are her thoughts on this arrangement? The Queen's sapphire eyes narrowed. Lyra understands her duty to the throne, she stated, her tone carefully neutral. But Douglas detected a subtle evasion, a hint of something concealed. Was Lyra truly willing, or was she simply another victim of the Queen's ambition? I must speak with her directly, Douglas declared, his voice firm. I cannot make any decision without knowing her thoughts, her feelings. He was pushing back, asserting his agency in a situation where he was meant to be nothing more than a tool. The Queen regarded him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then a slow smile spread across her lips. Very well, Douglas Williams, she conceded. I will grant your request. But be warned, she added, her voice infused with steel, disobedience will not be tolerated. The consequences will be severe. The power dynamic remained unchanged, the threat still hanging heavy in the air. The crystalline throne room faded into a corridor of polished obsidian, cool and smooth beneath Douglas's fingertips as the guards steered him forward. The air, thick with the Queen's manufactured chill, thinned, replaced by a softer, almost floral scent that tickled his nostrils. The rhythmic click of the guards' armored boots echoed off the walls, a stark contrast to the muted ambience that now enveloped him. His escorts halted before a set of double doors crafted from a shimmering, opalescent material, unlike anything he'd ever seen. They slid open with a silent grace, revealing Lyra's private chambers. The room was bathed in a gentle, diffused light that filtered through a series of organically shaped windows, revealing a panoramic view of the Andromedan cityscape. Soft, plush fabrics covered the furniture, and living plants with bioluminescent leaves cascaded from hanging planters, creating a serene and inviting atmosphere. Lyra stood near one of the windows, her back to him, her regal posture betraying a subtle tension. Her gown, a flowing cascade of sapphire silk, shimmered in the soft light. He stepped inside, the doors closing silently behind him. "Princess Lyra," he began, his voice a low rumble in the spacious room. Lyra turned, her expression a carefully constructed mask of composure. "Douglas Williams," she acknowledged, her voice cool and melodious. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." Her violet eyes, usually so vibrant, seemed clouded with a deep-seated unease. Douglas took a step closer, acutely aware of the distance between them, both physical and emotional. "With all due respect, Princess, I wouldn't exactly call it agreeing. I was ordered." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm deeply uncomfortable with the circumstances, and I need to understand how you feel about all of this." A flicker of something, perhaps resentment, perhaps resignation, crossed Lyra's face. "And you believe my feelings matter in this arrangement?" she asked, her tone filled with a hint of bitterness. "They matter to me," Douglas stated firmly. "I'm not going to be a pawn in some royal breeding program without knowing what's going on in your head." Lyra sighed, the sound barely audible. "You assume I have a choice. My duty is to my people, to the throne, my mother." She hesitated, then continued, "My mother believes this is the only way to ensure the stability of the Andromedan dynasty. Stability achieved through forced procreation." Douglas countered, raising an eyebrow. "That sounds barbaric." Lyra's shoulders slumped slightly. "You don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am defective." She turned away from him, gazing out at the cityscape. In Andromedan society, pheromones are everything. They dictate attraction, social standing, even political power. They are the invisible threads that bind us together. She paused, taking a shaky breath. I cannot produce them naturally. I am incomplete." Douglas frowned, piecing together the puzzle. "So without these pheromones, you're considered undesirable, unfit," Lyra corrected, her voice flat. "Unfit to rule, unfit to mate, unfit to even fully participate in Andromedan society." She gestured to the city below. "Everything you see down there is governed by pheromonal interactions. I am excluded." "That's incredibly short-sighted," Douglas said, shaking his head. "To judge someone based on a single biological function. It ignores everything else they have to offer, your intelligence, your empathy." Lyra turned back to him, her eyes widening slightly. You see value in those things?" she asked, a hint of surprise in her voice. "Most Andromedans treat me with pity or worse, disdain. They see me as a genetic anomaly, a blight on the royal line." "They're wrong," Douglas said, his voice firm. "Diversity is a strength, not a weakness. And who's to say these pheromones are the be-all and end-all of connection? Maybe there are other ways to build relationships, to find intimacy." "My mother has explored those avenues," Lyra said, a hint of weariness in her voice. "Artificial pheromone synthesis, gene therapy. Nothing has worked to her satisfaction, and the council has deemed them insufficient." Douglas paused, considering his options. What about other scientific solutions? Perhaps there's a way to stimulate pheromone production, or even bypass the need for them altogether. Lyra shook her head. The Queen would never allow it. She wants this done the old-fashioned way. She wants an heir, and she wants it quickly. Douglas stepped closer, his gaze intense. Forget the Queen for a moment. Forget your duty. What do you want, Lyra? Do you truly want to go through with this breeding arrangement? Lyra hesitated, her gaze flickering away from his. I have a responsibility, she stammered. To my people, to the throne, and the Queen has assured me that this alliance with humanity could bring untold benefits to both our species. Benefits that outweigh your own happiness. Douglas challenged, his voice soft but insistent. He took a step closer, and Lyra took a step back. I don't know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I have never been given a choice. Then let's find one, Douglas said, his eyes locking with hers. I'm a xenobiologist. I study alien life. Maybe I can help you. Maybe I can find a solution to this genetic anomaly. Lyra's eyes widened, a spark of hope flickering within them. You would do that? I would, Douglas confirmed. But only if you want me to. Only if you agree to work with me to explore every possible option. And only if we both agree that any decision we make will be based on mutual consent and respect. Lyra studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded slowly. I agree, she said, her voice gaining strength. But be warned, Douglas Williams. My mother is not easily swayed. She has hidden agendas, and she will stop at nothing to achieve her goals. A high-pitched chime echoed through the room, cutting through the silence. Lyra stiffened. That's her signal, she said, her voice tinged with apprehension. She knows we've been talking for too long. The doors slid open, revealing the Queen standing in the doorway, her sapphire eyes narrowed. Douglas Williams, she said, her voice sharp and cold. Your time is up. Return to your quarters. Douglas met her gaze, his expression unyielding. Of course, Your Majesty. He turned to Lyra, offering a small, reassuring smile. Until tomorrow, Princess. As Douglas was escorted back to his quarters, the Queen's words hung heavy in the air. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap, that Lyra was more than just a pawn in the Queen's game. He had to find out what the Queen was really planning, and he had to protect Lyra, even if it meant defying the most powerful being on this planet. He considered his options: to escape, to resist, or to play along while he investigated the Queen's true motives. For now, he would bide his time and learn as much as he could. Lyra was left alone in her chambers, the Queen's presence still lingering in the air. Douglas's words echoed in her mind, questioning everything she had ever believed about duty and sacrifice. Was she truly serving her people, or was she simply a puppet in her mother's elaborate scheme? The Queen's true intentions for Lyra were beginning to unravel, and Lyra knew that she had to make a choice: to continue down the path laid out for her, or to forge her own destiny, even if it meant defying her own mother. Douglas entered his quarters and vowed to himself that he would do everything in his power to help Lyra escape this situation and to uncover the Queen's true motives, showing his growing tenacity. Douglas began to immerse himself in the alien science. Holographic displays flickered to life around him, showcasing the spiraling complexity of andromed pheromone biology. He ran his hand through his hair, the gesture betraying the mounting frustration he felt. It was a biological tapestry woven with threads he couldn't quite grasp, a system of cascading enzymes and receptor proteins far exceeding anything he'd encountered on Earth. The cool hum of the projectors filled the air, a stark contrast to the growing heat of his concentration. He turned to Lyra, who observed him with a patient stillness. It's intricate, he admitted, carefully choosing his words. More so than I initially anticipated. Lyra inclined her head. Andromedan biology is rarely straightforward, Douglas. Our evolution has favored complexity. Which is why, he continued, pushing forward, I believe a gene therapy approach might be viable. Using modified human viruses rendered harmless, of course, to deliver corrective genes directly to your pheromone-producing glands. He gestured to a schematic on the display, outlining the proposed mechanism. Lyra studied the diagram, her expression thoughtful. A targeted intervention. Interesting. To proceed, you would require access to the Royal Genetic Archives. A wave of anticipation washed over Douglas. That would be invaluable. It would allow me to pinpoint the precise genetic sequences responsible for the anomaly. Lyra nodded. I will arrange it. She led him through a labyrinthine corridor, the crystalline walls pulsing with a faint, internal light. They arrived at a massive chamber, dimly lit and filled with towering data stacks that stretched towards the vaulted ceiling. The air hung heavy with the musty scent of ancient data storage, a palpable sense of history pressing down on them. These archives contain the genetic history of the entire Andromedan royal line, Lyra explained, her voice hushed with reverence. Be warned, Douglas. You will find that our obsession with genetic purity runs deep. As Douglas delved into the archives, he began to understand the extent of that obsession. Generations of selective breeding, meticulously documented and ruthlessly enforced. He scrolled through Lyra's genetic code on a holographic display, and that's when he saw them subtle anomalies, inconsistencies that didn't quite fit the established patterns. It was as if her defect wasn't a simple malfunction but something more. The flickering light of the display reflected in his narrowed eyes. He needed a space to work, a sanctuary from the constant scrutiny. Lyra, would it be possible to set up a temporary laboratory, somewhere I can conduct experiments without constant observation? Lyra considered his request. I can arrange that. There's a disused antechamber adjacent to my private quarters. It's not equipped as a laboratory, but it could be adapted. Soon, a section of Lyra's chambers was transformed. Equipment hummed, strange chemicals bubbled in glass containers, and the sharp scent of disinfectants mingled with Lyra's perfume. Douglas felt a surge of purpose, but their haven didn't go unnoticed. One evening, the Queen swept into the makeshift lab, her sapphire eyes glacial. Douglas Williams, she said, her voice infused with disapproval. Your methods are unorthodox. I trust you understand the delicacy of this situation. I assure you, Your Majesty, I am proceeding with the utmost care, Douglas replied, carefully modulating his tone. Care is not enough. Results are required, and swiftly. Do not presume upon my generosity, human. Resources are finite. The threat hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. Despite the Queen's veiled warning, Douglas pressed on. He began preliminary experiments on Andromedan cell cultures, attempting to introduce the modified virus. But the unique nature of Andromedan DNA presented unexpected challenges. The cells reacted unpredictably, some accepting the virus, others rejecting it outright. The bubbling of liquids and the whirring of centrifuges filled the lab, a constant soundtrack to his frustration. Lyra, however, proved to be an invaluable assistant. She absorbed the complex scientific concepts with remarkable speed, her sharp intellect surprising Douglas. The viral capsid is destabilizing before it can effectively penetrate the cellular membrane, she observed, pointing to a microscopic image on the display. Perhaps a modification to its protein structure. Douglas stared at her, impressed. You have a remarkable grasp of this, Lyra. Have you had prior experience? Lyra hesitated, a shadow passing over her face. I studied science in secret as a child, but the Queen deemed it unfitting for a princess. She redirected my education towards more appropriate pursuits. A wave of empathy washed over Douglas. So, you were forced to suppress your passion. Lyra met his gaze, a spark of defiance in her eyes. Indeed, it seems we both have experience with societal expectations. A shared smile passed between them, a moment of camaraderie that transcended their vastly different backgrounds. It was a bond forged in shared frustration and a mutual desire to defy expectations. Douglas returned to his work, synthesizing a modified virus with Lyra's suggested modifications, but the results were still mixed. Some cells responded positively, exhibiting increased pheromone production. Others remained stubbornly resistant. Then, disaster struck. Douglas examined the cell cultures under a high-powered microscope, and his blood ran cold. A foreign substance, something organic but utterly alien, had contaminated the samples. The distorted images swam before his eyes, a sinking feeling settling in his stomach. Someone had sabotaged his experiment. He confronted Lyra, his voice tight with suspicion. Someone is trying to undermine our efforts, Lyra. Someone within the royal court. Lyra's eyes widened in shock. That's impossible. Who would do such a thing? I don't know, Douglas admitted, but we need to find out. Someone is actively working against us. Lyra's expression hardened, her initial shock giving way to anger. Then we will find them. I will not allow my mother's court to dictate my fate. Together, they reviewed security footage from the lab, the grainy images flickering across the screen. Hours passed, filled with tense silence until they finally saw it, a cloaked figure moving with practiced stealth, entering Douglas's lab during the night. Lyra gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That's one of the Queen's personal guards. I recognize his gait. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her own mother was actively sabotaging her chances at a normal life. The depth of the betrayal was staggering. Douglas reached out, taking her hand in his. Their fingers intertwined, a silent exchange of comfort and understanding. In that moment, they realized that they could only truly trust each other. Their bond, forged in adversity, had grown stronger than ever. We have to proceed, Lyra, Douglas said, his voice firm. Even with the sabotage. I believe I can counteract the contaminant using my knowledge of xenobiology, but it's risky. Lyra met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and grit. I trust you, Douglas. I have to. What do you need me to do? She knew that the potential consequences of his plan could be devastating, but she was desperate, and she believed in him. Douglas looked at her and said, "We do this together." Douglas adjusted the focusing lens of the gene sequencer, the hum of its crystalline core a constant drone in the sterile chamber. Lyra lay on the bio bed, her violet skin shimmering under the cool, blue light. Fine tendrils of energy pulsed from the sequencer, weaving intricate patterns across her genetic tapestry. He monitored the readouts, each fluctuating line a testament to the delicate dance between human ingenuity and alien biology. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice soft, permeated with concern. Lyra winced, her brow furrowed. "The resonance is intense, a burning deep within my cells." Empathy washed over Douglas, a wave of shared discomfort. He knew, intellectually, the process of rewriting her genetic code was bound to be painful, but experiencing it vicariously through their growing bond was almost unbearable. He rerouted the coolant feed, hoping to alleviate some of the burning sensation. "Just a little longer," he murmured, his fingers flying across the control panel. "I'm adjusting the energy matrix. This should help." His knowledge of Andromedan cellular structure, gleaned from countless hours of research and Lyra's own insights, allowed him to fine-tune the parameters beyond the sequencer's pre-programmed settings. He reduced the energy spikes, smoothing out the resonance field. The monitors flickered, displaying a cascade of data. Lyra's pheromone production, previously flatlined, showed a faint, erratic pulse. Hope surged through Douglas, quickly tempered by caution. The results were unstable, inconsistent, a tantalizing glimpse of what could be. Suddenly, the chamber doors hissed open, and two figures clad in the Queen's Crimson Guard armor strode in, energy rifles raised. Intruder alert. One of them barked, his voice distorted by the helmet's vocoder. "By order of the Queen, Douglas Williams is to be terminated." Lyra, despite her weakened state, reacted instantly. With a surge of adrenaline, she hurled herself off the bio bed, intercepting the guards before they could fire. Her enhanced andromedan strength sent one sprawling against the wall. Douglas, though not a trained fighter, grabbed a discarded energy scalpel from the instrument tray. "Lyra, no, you're too weak," he shouted, adrenaline coursing through him. She ignored him, engaging the remaining guard in hand-to-hand combat. Her movements were fluid and graceful, a stark contrast to the guard's brute force. Douglas, realizing he would only be a liability in a direct confrontation, focused on disabling the sequencer. If they were going to die, he wouldn't let the Queen benefit from their work. With a surge of power, Lyra disarmed the guard, slamming him against the wall beside his comrade. Both were unconscious, but alive. Douglas approached them cautiously, the energy scalpel still clutched in his hand. "Why?" he demanded, his voice trembling. "Why would the Queen do this?" Lyra knelt beside the guard she had subdued, placing a hand on his temple. A faint hum emanated from her fingertips as she delved into his mind. "She fears me," Lyra said, her voice strained. "My growing popularity. My influence over the court. She sees you as a threat, a destabilizing force." Douglas felt a cold dread creep into his heart. The Queen wasn't just trying to control Lyra, she was trying to eliminate any potential challenge to her power. They moved quickly, securing the guards and stripping them of their weapons. "We need to confront her," Douglas said, his mind focused. "Show her we know the truth." They stormed into the throne room, weapons drawn, interrupting the Queen's audience with the Andromedan Council. The crystalline structures pulsed with an ominous energy, reflecting the Queen's icy gaze. "Mother," Lyra declared, her voice resonating with newfound authority. "We know of your treachery. You ordered our assassination." The Queen's sapphire eyes narrowed. "These are baseless accusations," she said, her voice like shards of glacial ice. "I acted only in the best interests of the Andromedan people. Williams is a corrupting influence, a danger to our genetic purity." "Purity?" Lyra scoffed. "You speak of purity while plotting to murder your own daughter. You prioritize power over the well-being of your own kin." A murmur rippled through the council. Doubts like cracks in a frozen lake began to spread. A faction of the royal court, sympathetic to Lyra, began to question the Queen's leadership. The Queen rose from her throne, her face a mask of fury. "Guards, seize them, they are traitors." But the guards hesitated, their loyalty divided. Seeing their inaction, the Queen snarled, "Then I have no further use for either of you." Before she could issue another command, Lyra grabbed Douglas's hand and they turned to flee, but were met by the Queen's guards. The guards restrained them, and the Queen ordered Lyra and Douglas to be imprisoned. As the guards lead them away, a loyal servant of Lyra's slipped Douglas a small data chip. "This will help you escape," the servant whispered. They managed to escape the prison thanks to the data chip, which contained a map of the prison, and fled into the Andromedan wilderness, a vast expanse of bioluminescent forests and towering crystal formations. They sought refuge among a hidden community of genetic outcasts, those who, like Lyra, did not conform to the Queen's narrow definition of perfection. In this hidden community, they discovered that Lyra's defect was more common than previously believed. Many Andromedans exhibited similar genetic variations, suppressed and ostracized by the ruling elite. A spark of rebellion ignited in Lyra's eyes. "We are not defective," she declared to the gathered outcasts. "We are different, and our differences make us strong." Douglas watched her, filled with admiration. She was no longer the timid princess he had met in the throne room. She was a leader, a beacon of hope for the marginalized. As days turned into weeks, Lyra and Douglas began to organize the outcasts, training them in combat and teaching them how to harness their unique abilities. The seeds of a revolution had been sown. One evening, as they were planning their next move, Douglas noticed Lyra's pheromone production spiking erratically, accompanied by unusual energy fluctuations emanating from her body. "Lyra, what's happening?" he asked, his voice filled with alarm. She staggered, clutching her abdomen. I don't know, I feel strange." Suddenly, Lyra collapsed, her body convulsing. Douglas caught her in his arms, his heart pounding in his chest. The Andromedan healers rushed to her side, their faces etched with concern. "Her vital signs are fluctuating wildly," one of them said. "I've never seen anything like this." Just then, a cryptic message arrived from Douglas's human research team back on Earth, transmitted through a hidden comm channel. "Douglas, we've discovered something extraordinary about your genetic makeup," the message read. "Your unique interaction with Andromedan DNA. It's unlocking latent abilities within both you and Lyra. Prepare for unexpected consequences." Douglas stared at the message, his mind turning. What latent abilities? What unexpected consequences? He looked down at Lyra, her face pale and drawn. The gene therapy. It wasn't just correcting her defect. It was doing something far more profound, something transformative. Lyra's eyes fluttered open and she looked up at Douglas, her gaze filled with a mixture of fear and wonder. She reached out, her hand trembling, and placed it on his cheek. "Douglas," she whispered, her voice barely audible. We're having twins." Lyra gasped, her hand flying to her abdomen. The Andromedan healers, their multifaceted eyes wide, exchanged a rapid series of clicks and whistles. Douglas, his heart hammering against his ribs, stepped closer. "What is it? What's wrong?" One of the healers, its chitinous fingers trembling slightly, extended a scanner. The device hummed, casting an ethereal blue light over Lyra's form. The light pulsed, then doubled. The healer recoiled. "Impossible," it rasped, the word echoing strangely in the sterile chamber. "What's impossible?" Douglas demanded, his voice tight with anxiety. He reached for Lyra's hand, finding it cold. The lead healer, its mandibles clicking nervously, addressed them. "Princess Lyra, the scans indicate 2 life signs. You are carrying twins." Silence descended, thick and heavy. Douglas stared, his mind struggling to process the information. Twins. A human Andromedan pregnancy was already unprecedented, a single birth defying all known science. Twins were statistically impossible. Lyra's eyes widened, mirroring his shock. "Twins," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The lead healer continued, its tone grave. "Furthermore, the genetic structure of the offspring is complex. The interaction between human and Andromedan DNA is creating unpredictable results. This pregnancy is exceptionally high risk." Douglas felt a surge of protectiveness, fierce and overwhelming. He pulled Lyra closer, his arm a solid band around her. "What can we do? What needs to be done?" Days blurred into a frantic rush of research. Douglas, fueled by caffeine analogs and adrenaline, devoured every text on Andromedan reproductive biology he could find. He ran simulations on the crystalline processors, his fingers flying across the controls. Holographic projections flickered around him, displaying complex genetic sequences and anatomical diagrams. He saw the healers' concern, their mandibles working overtime. They offered little hope, their prognosis grim. One evening, hunched over a particularly dense text on Andromedan pheromone production, a connection sparked in Douglas's mind. A faint memory from his own genetic history resurfaced a dormant gene, a quirk in his DNA that had been dismissed as insignificant. Now, he saw its potential. His own, seemingly useless genetic marker might be the key to stabilizing Lyra's condition, to protecting the twins from the inherent incompatibilities. I think I have an idea," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Lyra, who had been watching him with worried eyes, placed a hand on his arm. "Douglas, you need to rest. You haven't slept in cycles." He shook his head, his mind racing. "I'm close, Lyra, I can feel it, but I need more time." "And the revolution," she countered, her voice firm. "The outcasts need you, we need you. My condition cannot be your sole focus." Douglas looked at her, seeing not just a princess, but a warrior, a leader. He knew she was right. He couldn't abandon the cause. but the thought of losing her, of losing their children. "Trust me," she said, her sapphire eyes locking with his. "I am stronger than you think. Focus on the fight, Douglas. I will handle this." Their journey led them to a hidden valley, shrouded in perpetual twilight. Crystalline structures, twisted and malformed, jutted from the landscape, remnants of failed genetic experiments. Here, the genetic outcasts eked out a precarious existence, shunned by Andromedan society for their deviations. The outcasts were wary, their multifaceted eyes narrowed as Douglas and Lyra approached. They were a diverse group, their physical forms a testament to the Queen's rigid eugenics program. Some had elongated limbs, others possessed iridescent scales, and still others bore vestigial wings. They were the living embodiment of genetic diversity, a concept the Queen sought to eradicate. "Why have you come?" A guttural voice echoed from the shadows. A figure emerged, its body covered in shimmering, chitinous plates. "We have nothing to offer you." "We seek knowledge," Lyra replied, her voice clear and strong. "We know of the Queen's eugenics program. We know of your suffering." Slowly, cautiously, the outcasts began to share their stories. They spoke of forced sterilizations, genetic manipulation, and the systematic suppression of any trait deemed undesirable. They revealed the true extent of the Queen's cruelty, her obsession with creating a perfect Andromedan race. Douglas listened, his anger growing with each revelation. He saw an opportunity, a way to use his abilities to empower these outcasts, to give them a fighting chance against the Queen. "I can help you," he said, his voice resonating with conviction. "I can unlock your hidden potential. I can give you the strength to fight back." He devised a plan, a way to amplify their latent abilities, to turn their defects into strengths. It was a risky plan, but it was their only hope. But their respite was short-lived. The Queen, alerted to their presence, unleashed her forces. Crystalline drones swarmed the valley, their energy weapons charged and ready. The attack was swift and brutal. Douglas, his senses heightened, reacted instantly. He channeled his abilities, focusing his energy on creating a protective shield around the community. A shimmering barrier of light erupted, deflecting the drone's energy blasts. As the shield held, Lyra felt a surge of power coursing through her veins. The pregnancy, the twins. They were amplifying her own latent abilities, unlocking a potential she never knew she possessed. Her body glowed with a soft, ethereal light. She raised her hands, focusing her energy. A wave of pure force erupted from her, slamming into the attacking drones. The crystalline constructs shattered, their energy dissipating into nothingness. The Queen, watching from her command ship, witnessed Lyra's power with growing alarm. The twins. They were not just a genetic anomaly, they were a threat. Her strategy shifted. Capture Lyra. Secure the twins. Use them for her own purposes. Douglas and Lyra, sensing the change in the Queen's tactics, knew they had to act fast. They rallied the outcasts, preparing for a final stand. The valley became a fortress, a beacon of hope in the face of overwhelming odds. Suddenly, Lyra swayed, her face paling. She collapsed into Douglas's arms, gasping for breath. "Lyra!" Douglas cried, his voice imbued with fear. Her body was struggling, he realized, struggling to sustain both the pregnancy and her amplified abilities. The twins were drawing on her strength, pushing her to her limits. He needed to find a way to stabilize her, to protect her and their children. Then it clicked. The twins weren't just a burden on her. They were essential to her and Douglas' survival. "The surges," Lyra gasped, clutching his hand. "The energy, it's coming from them." Douglas now understood. The twins were the source of the amplified abilities, the key to Lyra's power and possibly their survival. As they prepared for the onslaught, an Andromedan scientist, clad in a tattered lab coat, approached Douglas. "I know about the twins," he said, his voice urgent. "They are the key to a better future for all of us." Outside, the valley erupted in chaos. The revolution had begun. "It's more than just a defect, Douglas," Arlo said, his multifaceted eyes gleaming with manic energy. He gestured wildly with a shimmering data pad, its surface displaying complex schematics that swam before Douglas's eyes. The air in the lab hummed with nearly unleashed power, ozone tang mixing with the metallic scent of Andromedan machinery. These twins, their genetic code, it's revolutionary. They possess the potential to unlock dormant pathways within the entire Andromedan genome, pathways that could elevate our species to a new level of what? What are you saying? Douglas asked, his skepticism battling against a growing unease. He glanced at Lyra, who lay pale and still on a bio bed, her breathing shallow. Arlo jabbed a clawed finger at the data pad. Genetic potential, untapped abilities, the queen. She knew she suppressed this knowledge for generations. She feared the power that could be unleashed. Douglas frowned. Suppressed how? Through selective breeding, through genetic manipulation, through control. Arlo spat the word like venom. She maintained her power by keeping our species stagnant. These twins, they are the key to breaking free. Douglas remained unconvinced. That's a pretty big claim, Arlo. You're saying these fetuses have the power to change your entire species. Arlo spun, his movements frantic. He activated a series of holographic projectors, filling the lab with swirling patterns of light and energy. Look, the energy signatures. They're unlike anything I've ever seen. A resonance, a harmonic convergence. They're drawing power from dimensions we barely understand. As if on cue, Lyra gasped, her body convulsing. Alarms blared, bathing the lab in harsh red light. Lyra! Douglas cried, rushing to her side. Arlo frantically scanned the readouts. The twins, they're draining her, their development. It's accelerating at an unsustainable rate. She's weakening. What can we do? Douglas demanded, his voice tight with fear. You, Arlo said, his gaze intense. You are the key, Douglas, your human genetics. They're uniquely compatible with the twins' energy matrix. Your life force, it can stabilize her. Douglas stared at him, incredulous. My life force, what are you talking about? I'm a biologist, not a battery. There's no time to explain. Arlo shouted, grabbing Douglas's arm and dragging him towards the bio bed. Focus your mind, Douglas, channel your energy, your humanity, into her. Visualize the twins, their connection to Lyra. Stabilize the flow. Hesitantly, Douglas placed his hands on Lyra's clammy skin. He closed his eyes, focusing on the image of the twins, their tiny forms intertwined within Lyra's womb. He imagined a flow of energy, a warm, golden light emanating from his hands, flowing into Lyra, nourishing her, sustaining her. He focused, pushing aside the fear and the skepticism, focusing only on Lyra, on the twins, on the desperate need to save them. Slowly, the alarm subsided. Lyra's breathing became more regular. The red lights faded, replaced by a softer, more reassuring glow. Arlo checked the readouts, his expression a mixture of relief and concern. It's working. You've stabilized her. For now. But it's only temporary, Douglas. The twins' energy demands are increasing exponentially. We need a permanent solution, and fast. Suddenly, the lab shook violently. The lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. Explosions echoed in the distance. The revolutionaries, Arlo exclaimed. They've begun their assault on the palace. A comms panel crackled to life. A harried voice, distorted by static, barked, Arlo, we need your support. The Queen's forces are putting up heavy resistance. We're taking casualties. Arlo turned to Douglas, his expression grim. We have to protect Lyra, but we also need to help the revolutionaries. Can you do something? Create a diversion, anything to give them an edge. Douglas looked at Lyra, her face pale in the dim emergency lighting. He hesitated, then nodded. I can try, but I need to know what I'm up against. Arlo quickly briefed him on the palace defenses, the location of key power generators, and the weaknesses in the Queen's energy shield. Use your abilities to create a distraction, he urged. Disrupt their systems, overload their circuits. Anything to draw their attention away from the main assault. Douglas closed his eyes, focusing his mind. He reached out with his senses, probing the palace's energy grid, feeling the thrum of power, the intricate network of circuits and generators. He found a weak point, a vulnerability in the system. And he poured his energy into it, overloading the circuits, creating a cascade of explosions and blackouts that plunged parts of the palace into darkness. The revolutionaries seized the opportunity, breaching the outer defenses and pushing deeper into the palace complex. But the Queen's forces were not easily defeated. They regrouped, launching a devastating counterattack that pushed back the revolutionaries, forcing them to retreat. Lyra stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She gasped, her hand clutching at her stomach. "What's happening?" she whispered. "The revolutionaries, they're losing," Douglas said, his voice grim. Lyra struggled to sit up. "I have to help them," she insisted. "The twins. Their power, it's needed." "No," Douglas said firmly, pushing her back down. "You're too weak, Lyra, you can't risk your life." "But the revolution can wait," Douglas said. "Your life, the twins' lives, that's what matters." "But what if the twins can save the revolution? What if their power can turn the tide?" Lyra countered, her eyes pleading. Douglas hesitated. He knew Lyra was right. The twins' power was immense, potentially capable of shifting the balance of the conflict. But the risk was too great. He looked at Lyra, her face pale but determined. He saw the strength in her eyes, the unwavering commitment to her people. He knew he couldn't stop her. "Okay," he said finally, "but we do this together. We need to amplify your abilities to channel the twins' power. I can help you, Lyra. I can lend you my energy." They devised a plan, a risky gambit that would require all of their strength and focus. Douglas would act as a conduit, channeling his energy into Lyra, amplifying her abilities, and unleashing a wave of power that would overwhelm the Queen's forces. Together, they made their way to the front lines, dodging laser fire and explosions, their willpower fueled by a desperate hope. Reaching the heart of the battle, Lyra closed her eyes, focusing on the twins, on their connection to her, on the immense power that surged within her. Douglas placed his hands on her shoulders, channeling his energy into her, feeling the surge of power, the raw, untamed force that threatened to overwhelm him. He focused, channeling the energy, directing it, shaping it, and unleashing it in a blinding wave of light that swept across the battlefield, decimating the Queen's forces, shattering their defenses, and turning the tide of the battle. The Queen, watching from her command center, witnessed the power of the twins with growing alarm. "Capture her," she shrieked, pointing at Lyra. "Bring me the princess, alive." Elite guards clad in shimmering armor surged forward, targeting Lyra, ignoring the chaos around them. Douglas fought to protect her, but they were outnumbered, outgunned. In the confusion, they were separated. Douglas watched in horror as Lyra was seized, dragged away by the Queen's forces, her cries echoing in the chaos. "Lyra!" he shouted, his voice lost in the din of battle. He lunged forward, trying to reach her, but he was blocked by a wall of guards. Despair washed over him. He had failed. He had risked everything, and he had lost. But then a spark of defiance ignited within him. He would not give up. He would not let the Queen win. He would rescue Lyra regardless of the cost. The revolution, the future of both species. It all depended on it. Turning to Arlo, who had managed to stay close, Douglas asked, "What now? What can we do?" Arlo, his face grim, revealed, "There is a hidden weakness in the Queen's palace shield. An access point that requires a perilous solo mission." Douglas gripped the edge of the metal table, the cool surface a stark contrast to the fire in his gut. Arlo's proposition, disable the palace shield, opening the city to rebellion, was a suicide mission. But Lyra, the thought of her trapped, used, fueled a desperate grit. He met Arlo's multifaceted gaze. "I'll do it." Arlo's chitinous fingers extended, offering a device that resembled a polished obsidian beetle. "This exploits a hidden weakness in the shield's energy matrix, but be warned, human, it is unstable. Overload is a distinct possibility." He paused, his voice losing some of its edge. "The Queen will stop at nothing. Be careful." Donning a stolen Andromedan Guard uniform, the stiff, unfamiliar material scratching against his skin, Douglas moved with forced confidence. He navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the palace. His memory of the architectural schematics Arlo provided his only guide. The air hummed with the low thrum of energy conduits, a symphony of alien technology. He pressed himself against a cold, metallic wall as a patrol of guards strode past, their multifaceted eyes scanning the corridors. He held his breath, feeling a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. He reached a security checkpoint, a shimmering energy field blocking his path. Thinking quickly, Douglas rerouted a nearby power cable, overloading a sensor node. The energy field flickered and died, allowing him to slip through unnoticed. Rounding a corner, he stumbled upon a hidden laboratory. Through a shimmering force field, he saw Andromedan scientists huddled over several captured revolutionaries, their bodies strapped to tables, strange devices attached to their heads. The air crackled with the scent of ozone and fear. "The twins' genetic signature is the key," one scientist hissed, his voice a guttural rasp. "Their unique potential resonates with the shield's frequency. We're close to isolating the harmonic sequence." Douglas's blood ran cold. Twins. Lyra was carrying twins, and they were experimenting on them. He couldn't hesitate. Activating the stun function on his borrowed weapon, he disabled the force field and stormed into the lab. The scientists turned, their eyes wide with surprise. A swift series of calculated strikes rendered them unconscious. He released the revolutionaries, their bodies weak and trembling. "Human," one of the revolutionaries rasped, his voice filled with gratitude. "We are in your debt." "How can we repay you?" "Create a diversion," Douglas ordered. "Draw the guards away from the shield generator room. I need to disable the shield." The revolutionaries nodded, their eyes filled with newfound drive. They moved swiftly, setting off alarms and creating chaos, their actions a beacon of defiance in the heart of the palace. Douglas continued his advance, the sounds of the diversion echoing behind him. He reached the shield generator room, a massive chamber filled with pulsating energy conduits and complex machinery. Heavily armed guards stood watch at the entrance, their weapons trained on the corridor. He couldn't brute force his way through. He needed a distraction. Spotting a maintenance panel, he accessed the palace's internal communication system. Mimicking the voice of a high-ranking officer, he issued a false alarm, reporting a security breach on the opposite side of the palace. Some of the guards hesitated, glancing at each other. Douglas seized the opportunity, activating a smoke grenade he'd scavenged from a fallen guard. As the smoke filled the chamber, he slipped past the confused guards, disappearing into the generator room. Inside, the air thrummed with raw power. Douglas located the shield controls, a complex array of crystalline interfaces. He inserted the obsidian beetle, and the device whirred to life, its surface glowing with an eerie green light. He began the process of disabling the shield, but as he did, the device sputtered, emitting a high-pitched whine. The green light intensified, bathing the room in an unnatural glow. Then, with a violent surge, the device malfunctioned, sending a jolt of energy through the controls. Alarms blared throughout the palace, their piercing sound cutting through the hum of the machinery. Red lights flashed, illuminating the room in a chaotic strobe. He'd been discovered. As the alarms wailed, a section of the wall slid open, revealing a hidden chamber. Inside, a holographic projector flickered to life, displaying the image of the queen. Her sapphire eyes, cold and calculating, stared directly at him. "Douglas Williams," her voice echoed through the room, amplified by the crystalline structures. "I anticipated your arrival. Your resourcefulness is impressive, but ultimately irrelevant." The holographic queen smiled, a chilling expression that sent a shiver down Douglas's spine. "The twins. Their genetic potential is the key to unlocking a new era of Andromedan dominance." Their unique biology will be weaponized, creating a superweapon capable of crushing any opposition. With this weapon, my rule will be absolute. Her image flickered. Lyra was intentionally chosen for this breeding program. Her defect was irrelevant. The genetic mixing would ensure its suppression. She was merely a vessel, a means to an end. The queen's holographic eyes narrowed. Whether you live or die, whether she lives or dies, is of no consequence. The weapon will be born. My victory is assured. The wall behind Douglas slammed shut, sealing him inside the hidden chamber. From the shadows emerged the Queen's elite guard, their faces hidden behind metallic masks, their weapons charged and ready. He'd been lured into a trap. He looked at the malfunctioning device, then back at the guards. He knew what he had to do. The revolutionaries needed him to disable the shield, but Lyra. He had a choice to make: complete the mission or try to save Lyra, and he didn't have much time to decide. Douglas spun, deflecting a plasma blast with the salvaged energy shield he'd ripped from a deactivated sentry bot. The crystalline throne room had become a chaotic battlefield, the air thick with the acrid smell of burnt metal and ozone. He sidestepped another guard's clumsy lunge, his human reflexes a blur against the Andromedan's brute strength. A sharp jab to the pressure point behind the guard's knee sent him crashing to the ground, momentarily incapacitated. He used the fallen guard as cover, firing a stolen plasma pistol at another approaching soldier. The energy bolts ricocheted off the crystalline walls, creating a dazzling, disorienting light show. He ducked behind a pulsating energy conduit, remembering the scientist's frantic warnings. The twins' DNA. The key to the shield. Disrupt the genetic matrix. Lyra. He couldn't focus on the shield now. Saving her, saving them, was the only thing that mattered. He ripped the damaged energy shield from his arm, tossing it down the corridor as a distraction. It sparked and sputtered, drawing the guard's attention. He abandoned his attempt to disable the planetary shield, the fate of Earth now secondary to the woman he loved and the children she carried. He moved with a newfound purpose, navigating the palace with a desperate urgency. Pockets of resistance flared up around him, revolutionaries clashing with the Queen's loyalists. He saw Andromedans locked in fierce combat, plasma weapons flashing, their violet blood staining the crystalline floors. The scent of fear and desperation hung heavy in the air. He sprinted past a medical bay, glimpsing rows of shimmering bio-beds and complex machinery. The Andromedan medical technology was far more advanced than anything he'd ever seen, a testament to their scientific prowess. But all that technology couldn't heal a broken heart or replace the warmth of human connection. He found her in a high-security medical facility, deep within the palace. Lyra was suspended in a clear, gel-filled tube, her violet skin shimmering under the cold clinical lights. Wires and tubes snaked around her body, monitoring her vital signs. The sterile environment amplified her vulnerability, making her seem even more fragile. Her eyes widened as she saw him, her expression a mixture of relief and horror. "Douglas, what are you doing here?" "I'm here to get you out," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "But my mother," her voice trembled, she said it was for the good of the Empire. "She lied, Lyra. She's been using you, using us." Lyra's eyes welled up with tears. "I was intentionally chosen all this time." I thought. Douglas reached out, pressing his hand against the cool glass of the tube. "Hey, look at me. It doesn't matter why she chose you. What matters is what we choose. And I choose you, Lyra. I love you. And we're going to get through this together." He tried to access the control panel, but the system was locked down, protected by multiple layers of security protocols. He cursed under his breath. He needed to disrupt the facility's power grid, overload the system, anything to disable the security locks. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, a familiar sneer twisting his features. Arlo, the Queen's former advisor. "So the human comes to rescue the defective princess," he hissed, leveling a plasma pistol at Lyra's tube. "How touching. but your little romance ends here. What are you doing, Arlo? Douglas demanded, stepping in front of Lyra's prison. I'm preventing a disaster, Arlo spat. These things growing inside her. They're an abomination, a threat to the purity of the Andromedan race. My faction will not allow it. Arlo revealed that he was working for a rival faction of Andromedans who wanted to prevent the birth of the twins, believing they would destabilize the Empire. Douglas lunged at Arlo, knocking the plasma pistol from his hand. They grappled, their bodies slamming against the cold metal walls. Douglas, smaller and less powerful, relied on his agility and training, dodging Arlo's clumsy blows. As they fought, Lyra focused her mental energies, reaching out to the facility's power grid. She channeled her fear, her anger, her desperation, amplifying the energy output to a dangerous level. The lights flickered, the machinery hummed, and a high-pitched whine filled the air. Lyra, what are you doing? Douglas yelled, struggling to maintain his grip on Arlo. Ending this, she replied, her voice strained but resolute. Suddenly, the facility's systems overloaded. Sparks flew, alarms blared, and the security locks on Lyra's tube hissed open. Douglas shoved Arlo away, scrambling to free Lyra from her prison. He pulled her into his arms, cradling her close. We have to get out of here, he said, his voice urgent. They raced through the facility, dodging sparking wires and collapsing panels. The revolution raged outside, the palace crumbling around them. They had to escape before the Queen arrived. But as they reached the main corridor, they were met by a chilling sight. The Queen stood at the end of the hallway, flanked by her personal guard, their plasma weapons trained on them. The facility was surrounded, her sapphire eyes cold and hard fixed on Douglas. You have caused me a great deal of inconvenience, human. Let her go, mother, Lyra pleaded, her voice trembling. The Queen ignored her daughter, her gaze unwavering. I do not care for your life or the human's life, only for what you carry, the twins. They are the key. She paused, a cruel smile playing on her lips. You have a choice, Douglas Williams. Hand over Lyra and the twins, and I might spare your life. Refuse, and you will both die. I will not choose, Douglas declared, his voice resonating within the crystalline throne room. Lyra and her children are under my protection, all of them. The Queen's sapphire eyes narrowed, a barely perceptible flicker of something akin to disappointment crossing her face. Guards, she commanded, her voice infused with icy authority. Seize them. The royal guard, clad in shimmering obsidian armor, surged forward, energy weapons humming to life. Douglas moved instantly, placing himself between Lyra and the advancing soldiers. Lyra, despite the obvious discomfort the news of the twins had brought, focused her mental energies. A wave of psychic force rippled outwards, causing the guards to stumble, their movements sluggish and uncoordinated. Several dropped their weapons, clutching their heads in agony. As Douglas parried a blow from a guard's energy blade, he noticed the Queen's gaze. It wasn't on him, nor on the struggling guards. It was fixed on Lyra's abdomen, her sapphire eyes narrowed as if trying to pierce through flesh and bone. A cold dread washed over Douglas. It wasn't about Lyra's well-being, it was about what she carried. She doesn't care about you, Douglas grunted, deflecting another attack. She wants the twins. He launched a kick that sent a guard sprawling, then used the momentary distraction to shove Lyra behind him, creating a human shield between her and the Queen. Mother, please, Lyra cried, her voice tinged with desperation. What are you doing? The Queen's expression remained impassive, her features as cold and unyielding as the glacial plains of Andromedan Prime. The future of our kingdom depends on this, Lyra. Sentimentality has no place here. She's not trying to save Lyra, Douglas realized, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. She's planning to extract the twins. She sees them as weapons. A deafening roar shook the throne room. The crystalline structures hummed erratically and the lights flickered violently before plunging the room into near darkness. An explosion, somewhere close. Chaos erupted. The guards, disoriented by the blast and Lyra's psychic assault, faltered. Screams echoed through the throne room. The resistance, Douglas thought, adrenaline surging through his veins. They're making their move. He seized the opportunity. Grabbing Lyra's hand, he pulled her away from the queen and the struggling guards, heading deeper into the medical facility, towards the labyrinthine corridors he'd briefly glimpsed earlier. "Come on, we need to find somewhere safe." They stumbled through the darkened corridors, the air thick with smoke and the smell of ozone. Finally, they reached a heavy, blast-sealed door. Douglas slammed his hand on the access panel, overriding the security protocols. The door hissed open, revealing a hidden laboratory filled with strange, pulsating Andromedan technology. In the center of the lab stood a gleaming, ovoid structure, a stasis pod, its interior bathed in a soft, ethereal glow. A complex network of tubes and wires snaked across its surface, connected to a central control panel. "What is this place?" Lyra whispered, her voice filled with awe and trepidation. Douglas stared at the pod, his mind racing. The resistance. They must know about Lyra. They're trying to help her protect the twins. Suddenly, a holographic image flickered to life, resolving into the familiar face of the Andromedan scientist who had previously spoken with Douglas. Her image was slightly distorted, as if the recording was old, but her voice was clear and urgent. "If you're seeing this," she began, "then the Queen has already set her plan in motion. She intends to weaponize the twins, to exploit their unique genetic makeup for her own twisted purposes. The consequences will be catastrophic, not just for Andromedans but for humans as well." She paused, her holographic eyes filled with a desperate plea. "The stasis pod, it's the only way to protect them. It can safely house a developing fetus for an extended period, shielding them from the Queen's machinations." The recording flickered again, then stabilized. "Use it, Douglas Williams. Protect the future. Protect them both." As the scientist's image faded, a deafening crash echoed from the corridor outside. The door to the lab buckled inward, splintering under the force of multiple energy blasts. The Queen strode into the lab, followed by a contingent of heavily armed guards. Her sapphire eyes burned with cold fury. "Lyra," she commanded, her voice devoid of all warmth. "Hand over the twins. Now." Suddenly, Lyra gasped, clutching her stomach. Her face contorted in pain and she staggered back, collapsing against the stasis pod. "Lyra," Douglas cried, rushing to her side. The Queen's expression remained unchanged, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "It's begun. Her body is rejecting them, the human DNA. It's incompatible. If the twins are not extracted immediately, she will die." Lyra gasped, a sound like fractured crystal, her body arching against the bio-cushions. Her hands flew to her abdomen, fingers splayed wide as if to contain the impossible. "Douglas, I can't." The Queen's voice, amplified by the throne room's acoustics, cut through the air. "Guards, prepare for immediate extraction. Her body is rejecting the anomalies." The last word dripped with barely concealed disgust. Douglas surged forward, placing himself between Lyra and the advancing guards. "Extraction? What are you talking about, and on whose authority?" His voice, though filled with fear, held a steely edge. "You will not touch her until I see proof that this isn't some convenient manipulation." The Queen's sapphire eyes narrowed. "Insolent human. Very well, medics, scan her. Show him the truth of his accomplishment." Two towering Andromedans, clad in sterile white armor, approached with a hovering diagnostic array. The air hummed with the device's power as it washed over Lyra. Holographic projections flickered around them, displaying complex waveforms and indecipherable symbols. "The readings are unstable," one medic intoned, his voice resonating with concern. "Severe internal conflict detected. Maternal systems are experiencing catastrophic cascade failure." The second medic elaborated, his tone grim. "Mixed species pregnancies are exceptionally rare, Human Williams. Princess Lyra's physiology is reacting violently to the twins' hybrid nature. Their energy signatures are incompatible with her own. They are drawing too much sustenance, the first medic continued. Her organs are beginning to shut down. Extraction is the only viable option to save her life. Douglas's mind raced. Extraction? And what about the twins? Will they survive? What are the risks? He knew enough about Andromedan medical procedures to be deeply suspicious. Their technology was advanced, but their understanding of human biology was limited, and their willingness to experiment boundless. The Queen's patience, never plentiful, snapped. There is no time for debate. Proceed with the extraction. She gestured sharply towards the medics. Douglas stood his ground, planting his feet firmly. No, I refuse to allow it. I trust my own knowledge, my own instincts. There has to be another way. Lyra, pale and weakened, reached out a trembling hand towards him. Douglas, listen to him, I trust you. Her voice was barely a whisper, yet it resonated with unwavering conviction. He knelt beside her, taking her hand in his. I need the data from those scans, everything. The energy signatures, the metabolic rates, the hormonal levels. I need to analyze it myself. The Queen hesitated, her expression a mask of barely controlled fury. You presume much, human. Any delay will result in her death, and the loss of my grandchildren. But something in Lyra's trusting gaze, or perhaps the political fallout of Lyra's death, stayed her hand. Very well. But know this, Williams, their blood will be on your hands if you fail. The medics reluctantly transferred the data to a handheld device, which Douglas quickly connected to his own neural interface. The information flooded his mind, a chaotic torrent of alien biochemistry. He focused, filtering the noise, searching for patterns, anomalies, anything that could give him an edge. He saw it then, a subtle energy imbalance, a harmonic dissonance between Lyra's cellular structure and the twins' rapidly developing neural networks. It was as if two different musical scales were being played simultaneously, creating a destructive interference. The stasis pod, he exclaimed, his voice hoarse. Could it stabilize their development? Reduce the strain on Lyra's body while I research a more permanent solution. The stasis pod, the Queen's brow furrowed. That technology is not intended for use on a pregnant Andromedan. The side effects could be unpredictable. Lyra squeezed his hand, her eyes pleading. Please, Mother, let us try. I trust Douglas. I trust his humanity. Douglas nodded to the medics, his gaze firm. Prepare Lyra for stasis. Monitor her vitals closely. I need real-time feedback on her cellular activity. He barked orders, his voice gaining confidence, his human ingenuity taking command of the alien situation. The medics, despite their initial skepticism, followed his instructions, their movements precise and efficient. They connected Lyra to a network of biomonitors, their sensors tracing the delicate contours of her abdomen. With practiced care, they guided her towards the shimmering, ovoid form of the stasis pod. Lyra, her face etched with pain and drive, stepped inside. The pod hummed to life, bathing her in a soft, ethereal light. A field of energy enveloped her, suspending her in a state of suspended animation. Douglas watched the medical data stream across his interface. Lyra's condition was stabilizing. The energy imbalances were diminishing. But he knew this was only a temporary reprieve. He needed a permanent solution, and he needed it fast. He turned to the Queen, his eyes burning with intensity. I require access to your facility's research database. Everything you have on interspecies genetics, on Andromedan pregnancy, on everything. He paused, his gaze hardening. And everything you have on the resistance. I suspect their technology is involved. The Queen studied him, her expression unreadable. Very well, human, I will grant you access. But know this, my guards will monitor your every move. One wrong step, one hint of treachery, and both you and your family will face the consequences. A flicker of something unreadable crossed her face, a hint of triumph, and she issued a silent command to the guard standing nearby. Douglas dove into his research, the crystalline interface of the Andromedan database humming beneath his fingertips. Holographic schematics shimmered before him, intricate webs of light depicting genetic structures and energy flows. He focused on studies related to genetic anomalies and mixed-species pregnancies, the alien symbols slowly resolving into understandable patterns. He discovered that previous attempts at interspecies procreation had always resulted in failure. Twisted protein strands, cellular rejection, catastrophic energy imbalances, the reports painted a grim picture. But the data was limited, fragmented, often suppressed, as if someone wanted to bury the truth. Each failure was a stark reminder of the odds stacked against Lyra and the twins. Then, buried deep within a restricted archive, he found it. A hidden file detailing a previous experiment involving a genetic condition similar to Lyra's, though even more pronounced. The subjects, a Larian female and a Draconid male, had conceived, but the results were deemed catastrophic. Organ failure, neural degeneration, and ultimately death. The research was terminated, the file stamped with a crimson symbol of absolute prohibition. A chill snaked down Douglas's spine. He cross-referenced the data with Lyra's medical reports, his brow furrowing. Something wasn't adding up. The Queen's medics had presented a picture of near-certain failure, citing Lyra's inability to produce the necessary pheromones. But Douglas noticed inconsistencies in the energy readings, subtle discrepancies in the genetic markers. Lyra's condition might not be as dire as they claimed. He focused on the energy signatures emanating from the twins, the data streams painting a vibrant, chaotic picture. Amidst the familiar Andromedan energy patterns and the faint echoes of human biosignatures, he identified something entirely new, a previously unknown energy pattern, unique to their hybrid nature. It pulsed with a strange, almost sentient rhythm, a symphony of life unlike anything he had ever encountered. He hypothesized that this unique energy pattern was interfering with Lyra's natural pheromone production, causing the rejection response that plagued her. The Andromedan reproductive system, so reliant on precise chemical signals, was being disrupted by the twins' very existence. Night bled into day as Douglas worked tirelessly. He combined Andromedan technology resonance chambers, energy conduits, genetic sequencers with his own understanding of human biology. He formulated a plan to counteract this energy pattern, to harmonize the twins' unique signature with Lyra's natural systems. A plan born of desperation, ingenuity, and a growing love for the princess who carried his children. Meanwhile, in the shadowed underbelly of the crystalline city, the resistance was stirring. Led by Jax, a former royal guard whose loyalty to the queen had shattered after witnessing her ruthlessness, they prepared for their first act of defiance. Jax, his face etched with willpower, addressed his team in a dimly lit chamber, holographic maps shimmering around them. Tonight we strike at the heart of the Queen's control. We disrupt her communications network and broadcast a message of hope to the oppressed citizens of Andromeda. A young Andromedan woman, her eyes filled with fear, spoke up. Jax, the risks are immense if we are caught. Jax's voice hardened. We all know the risks, but we also know the Queen's tyranny. She has silenced dissent, suppressed knowledge, and controlled our very lives for too long. We must fight for a better future. He paused, his gaze sweeping across their faces. For our children. Back in the medical facility, Douglas took a deep breath and strode into the Queen's private chamber. The air crackled with unspoken power as he confronted her. Your Majesty, I have been reviewing Lyra's medical data. I've found some inconsistencies. The Queen's sapphire eyes narrowed. Inconsistencies. I assure you, Dr. Williams, my medics are the most skilled in the galaxy. Yet they failed to mention the suppressed research on similar genetic conditions, Douglas pressed, holding up a holographic display. Why was this information withheld? The Queen's expression hardened. That research was deemed too dangerous. It threatened the stability of Andromedan society. It is irrelevant to Lyra's current situation. Irrelevant. It shows that there may be ways to mitigate the rejection response, ways that your medics are deliberately ignoring. Douglas stepped closer, his voice low and intense. Why, Your Majesty? What are you truly trying to achieve? The Queen became defensive, her voice rising. I am only concerned with Lyra's well-being and the future of her lineage. You dare question my motives? Douglas refused to back down. He presented the energy readings, the genetic markers, the subtle discrepancies that pointed to a far more complex situation. You've been secretly sterilizing individuals with genetic anomalies, viewing them as a threat to your power. Lyra's children represent a break from your control, and you can't allow that. Suddenly, a piercing alarm blared throughout the facility, shattering the tense silence. Red lights flashed, casting the Queen's face in a demonic glow. A harried guard rushed into the chamber, his voice tight with panic. Your Majesty, we are under attack. The Resistance has launched an assault on the communications center. Douglas's mind raced. The Resistance's actions could jeopardize everything, disrupting his research, endangering Lyra and the twins. But he also saw an opportunity, a chance to expose the Queen's true nature to the entire galaxy. He knew what he had to do. The crystalline city thrummed with a nervous energy, a silent scream masked by its usual ethereal glow. The Resistance had struck a blow, disrupting the Queen's meticulously crafted network of control, but the cost had been steep. Douglas could feel the shift in the atmosphere, a tightening of the invisible web that held the city captive. Jax, he knew, was injured, but had managed to slip through the tightening net. The Queen's response was swift and brutal. A city-wide lockdown descended, the shimmering force field sealing off sectors, the ever-present surveillance drones multiplying like metallic insects. Douglas felt it in the sudden silence of the transport tubes, in the increased patrols of the crystalline guards, their multifaceted eyes gleaming with cold purpose. He and Lyra were confined to their quarters, the luxurious prison doing little to ease the tension that coiled within him. The panoramic view of the Andromedan cityscape, usually a source of wonder, now felt like a mocking reminder of their captivity. Douglas tinkered with a discarded comm device he had salvaged from a maintenance bot, his fingers nimble despite his apprehension. He was hoping he could find a way to contact the outside world. Static crackled in his ear, a chaotic symphony of scrambled signals. Then a flicker of coherence, a fragmented message, barely audible above the noise. It was Jax. Cache, Sector 7, Queen's Crimes, suppressed data. The signal dissolved into static, leaving Douglas with a burning urgency. Lyra watched him, her sapphire eyes clouded with worry. What was that? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Douglas turned to her, his expression grim. Jax, he mentioned a hidden cache of information, something that could expose your mother's crimes. Lyra's hand instinctively went to her abdomen, a protective gesture towards the life growing within her. I don't know what to believe anymore, she said, her voice thick with emotion. My mother, she always seemed so certain, but lately, I've seen a darkness in her eyes, a coldness that frightens me. And now with the twins. Douglas gently took her hand. I know this is difficult, Lyra, but we need to find out the truth. For you, for our children, for everyone. He paused, then revealed what he had learned. I've also been reviewing some of the data I was able to access before the lockdown. There's suppressed research, Lyra, research on genetic anomalies, research that suggests your condition isn't as unique as your mother claims. Lyra's eyes widened, a flicker of hope igniting within their depths. What do you mean? It seems the Queen has been manipulating the Andromedan gene pool for generations, suppressing certain traits, promoting others. Your defect might not be a random occurrence but a deliberate act of control. Lyra's face paled. The revelation was a blow, shattering the foundations of her understanding of her own life. This is monstrous, she whispered. Douglas nodded grimly. Jax's cache could contain the evidence we need to expose her, but getting to it won't be easy. He looked at her, his eyes filled with persistence. I have a plan, but it's risky. We'll need to sneak out of here, navigate the lockdown, and find that data. Lyra hesitated for only a moment. Her gaze hardened, her royal blood rising to the surface. Then let's do it, she said, her voice firm. I know the security protocols. I can bypass some of the scanners. And I know the layout of this sector better than anyone. Under the cover of a scheduled power fluctuation, they slipped out of their quarters. Lyra, her royal bearing still evident despite her fear, guided them through the labyrinthine corridors. She manipulated access panels, rerouted surveillance feeds, and whispered commands to automated systems, her knowledge of the palace's inner workings proving invaluable. But their luck didn't last. Rounding a corner, they encountered a patrol of loyalist guards, their crystalline armor gleaming under the dim emergency lights. The guards, startled by their presence, raised their energy rifles. Halt! You are in violation of lockdown protocol. One of them barked, his voice amplified by his helmet. There was no time to talk. Douglas reacted instantly, throwing a handful of EMP grenades he had fashioned from spare parts. The guards' weapons sputtered and died, their crystalline bodies momentarily frozen in place. Lyra, with a speed and agility that belied her condition, disarmed the stunned guards, using a series of swift strikes to disable them without causing permanent harm. As they continued their desperate flight, the Queen, alerted to their unauthorized departure, watched the security footage with growing fury. Douglas Williams, she hissed, her sapphire eyes burning with rage. I should have known. And Lyra, she has betrayed me. She turned to her commander. Find them, prioritize their capture. I want them alive. For now. Douglas and Lyra reached Sector 7, a deserted maintenance hub on the outskirts of the city. The location Jax had indicated was a small, unmarked access panel hidden behind a deactivated power conduit. But the panel was guarded by a heavily armed unit, their energy rifles trained on the access point. Damn it, Douglas muttered. Looks like Jax wasn't the only one who knew about this. Lyra took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the area. There's a ventilation shaft above us. We can use it to get behind them. Working together, they scaled the wall, their movements synchronized and silent. Douglas disabled the ventilation system with a quick burst of electromagnetic energy, plunging the guards into darkness. In the ensuing chaos, they dropped down behind the guards, using a combination of human ingenuity and Andromedan martial arts to subdue them. Douglas used a modified sonic disruptor to incapacitate them, while Lyra used a specialized nerve pinch to render them unconscious. Douglas quickly accessed the panel and retrieved the data chip. He plugged it into a portable reader, his fingers flying across the interface. The screen flickered to life, displaying a series of encrypted files. He bypassed the security protocols with practiced ease, his heart pounding in his chest. The data revealed a horrifying truth. The Queen had been systematically sterilizing Andromedans with undesirable genetic traits, manipulating the gene pool to create a race of obedient and predictable subjects. The files contained irrefutable evidence of her crimes, including genetic profiles, medical records, and encrypted communication logs. Lyra stared at the screen, her face etched with horror. This is unspeakable, she whispered, her voice trembling. She has betrayed her own people. She has betrayed me. She looked at Douglas, her eyes filled with a fierce persistence. We have to expose her. We have to show the Andromedan Council what she has done. Suddenly, Lyra gasped, clutching her abdomen. A sharp, agonizing pain ripped through her, doubling her over. Lyra, what's wrong? Douglas cried, his voice filled with alarm. Lyra's face was pale, her skin slick with sweat. The twins, she gasped. I think they're coming. Douglas's blood ran cold, premature labor, at this stage without proper medical care. Before he could react, the corridor filled with the Queen's guards, their energy rifles trained on them. They were trapped. "There's no escape, Douglas Williams," the commander of the guard said, his voice cold and emotionless. "The Queen has ordered your capture." Just when all hope seemed lost, a familiar figure limped into view, supported by two resistance fighters. It was Jax, his face bruised and bloodied, his arm in a makeshift sling. "Get out of here," Jax shouted, his voice hoarse. "We'll hold them off." The resistance fighters opened fire, creating a diversion. Douglas grabbed Lyra, his heart pounding in his chest. "We have to go, now." They stumbled through the chaos, dodging laser fire and explosions. Jax's sacrifice had bought them a precious few minutes, but Lyra's condition was worsening with every step. Her face was contorted in pain, her breathing shallow and ragged. It was clear that she needed immediate medical attention, or the twins, and Lyra, might not survive. "Twins." Douglas stammered, the word echoing in the small room. Jax gripped his arm, urgency etched on his face. "No time for celebrations. The Queen will not take this news lightly. We need to move now." He pulled them towards the back of the room. "There's a resistance medical facility on the outskirts. It's our best chance." The journey was a blur of darkened corridors and hushed whispers. The air grew thick with the metallic tang of fear as they moved deeper into the city's underbelly. Finally, they arrived at a nondescript building, its entrance concealed behind a crumbling facade. Inside the facility was a stark contrast to the Queen's pristine palace. Dimly lit by flickering bioluminescent panels, the cramped rooms were filled with outdated equipment and exhausted-looking medics. "This is it?" Douglas asked, his voice permeated with concern. A weary Andromedan medic approached. "It's what we have. We weren't expecting this." Her gaze flickered between Lyra and Douglas, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension in her eyes. "A mixed-species pregnancy. And twins. We're not equipped for this. Our equipment is old and we barely have enough supplies for standard procedures." Douglas's mind raced. He scanned the room, assessing the available resources. "We'll make do," he said, his voice firm. "I've seen worse. I can adapt the equipment, create makeshift solutions. But we need to work fast." Hours blurred into a frenzy of activity. Douglas, fueled by adrenaline and desperation, worked tirelessly, modifying outdated incubators, recalibrating diagnostic tools, and synthesizing nutrient solutions from meager supplies. The sounds of clanking metal, whirring machinery, and hushed instructions filled the air. He explained to the Andromedan medics how to adapt their tools to accommodate human physiology, his xenobiological knowledge proving invaluable. Lyra's labor began with a slow burn, a dull ache that gradually intensified into sharp, searing pain. She gripped Douglas's hand, her iridescent skin slick with sweat. It's starting," she gasped, her voice strained. Douglas wiped her brow, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'm here, Lyra, we'll get through this." As Lyra's labor progressed, complications arose. The twins' mixed genetics presented unforeseen challenges. One twin was positioned in a breech, its tiny form pressing against Lyra's pelvis in an unnatural way. Douglas's face paled. "Breech presentation," he muttered, his voice tight with concern. "We need to reposition the baby or we risk serious complications." He explained the situation to the Andromedan medics, outlining the procedure he planned to perform. It was risky, requiring precise movements and a deep understanding of Andromedan anatomy, combined with human medical techniques. Just as he was preparing to begin, Jax burst into the room, his face grim. "They're coming. The Queen's forces are closing in. We don't have much time." Douglas swore under his breath, his mind racing. He had a choice to make: abandon Lyra and the twins or risk everything to save them. He looked into Lyra's eyes, seeing the fear and the unwavering dedication reflected back at him. "We stay," he said, his voice resolute. "I'm not leaving her." With renewed drive, Douglas began the procedure. His hands moved with practiced precision, his mind focused on the task at hand. He carefully manipulated the baby's position, his fingers tracing the contours of its tiny body. Sweat dripped from his brow as he felt the baby slowly shift, turning into a head-down position. Finally, with a sigh of relief, he straightened up. "It's done," he announced, his voice hoarse. "The baby is in the correct position." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, but their respite was short-lived. Lyra cried out, her body convulsing with the force of the contractions. Moments later, with a final push, the first twin emerged, a healthy girl with a delicate mix of human and andromedan features. Her skin shimmered with a faint iridescent glow, and her eyes were the same deep blue as Lyra's. But as the medics turned their attention to the second twin, Lyra suddenly went limp. Blood gushed from her, staining the sterile sheets a horrifying crimson. "Hemorrhage!" One of the medics shouted, panic rising in her voice. "She's losing too much blood." Douglas's heart lurched. He knew that andromedan physiology was different from human, and their bodies reacted differently to trauma. He remembered an experimental coagulation serum he had developed during his research, a serum designed to accelerate blood clotting in alien species. It was a long shot, but it was their only chance. He grabbed the vial, his hands trembling as he injected the serum into Lyra's arm. He watched, his breath held captive in his lungs as the bleeding slowly subsided. Finally, the hemorrhage stopped. Lyra gasped, her eyes fluttering open. The other one," she whispered, her voice weak. With renewed urgency, the medics delivered the second twin, a boy, but his cries were weak and shallow. His chest barely rose and fell. "He's not breathing properly," a medic said, her voice grim. "His lungs are underdeveloped." Douglas examined the baby, his mind racing. He needed to create a makeshift incubator and ventilation system, and he needed to do it now. He scavenged parts from discarded equipment, wiring together salvaged technology with his knowledge of neonatal care. He created a small, enclosed space, regulating the temperature and humidity with makeshift controls. He then rigged up a rudimentary ventilation system, forcing air into the baby's lungs. As he worked, the sounds of fighting echoed closer, the sharp crackle of energy weapons and the guttural cries of andromedan soldiers filling the air. The resistance members gathered, their faces grim. "We can't stay here," Jax said, his voice urgent. "The Queen's forces are about to breach the perimeter. We need to evacuate." "We're not going anywhere," Douglas said, his voice firm. "We can't move the twins, they're too fragile." "But we can't defend this place," Jax argued. "We'll all be killed." "Then we'll stay and fight," Lyra said, her voice weak but resolute. "We won't abandon our children." Jax sighed, his expression softening. "There's a hidden underground tunnel," he said. "It leads to the outskirts of the city. It's our only chance." He paused, his gaze hardening. "A small group of us will stay behind to provide a diversion, giving you time to escape." As Douglas and Lyra prepared to leave, carrying their newborn twins in their arms, a deafening explosion rocked the facility. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. "They're here," someone shouted, their voice filled with terror. Jax grabbed Douglas's arm, his grip tight. "Go, now, we'll hold them off as long as we can." Douglas hesitated, his heart heavy with guilt. He knew that Jax and the other resistance fighters were sacrificing themselves to save them. "Thank you," he said, his voice choked with emotion. Jax nodded, his expression resolute. "Just get them out of here. That's all that matters." With a final look of commitment, Jax turned and ran towards the sound of the fighting. Douglas and Lyra stumbled through the darkness, their footsteps echoing in the narrow tunnel. As they moved deeper into the earth, the sounds of battle faded behind them, replaced by the oppressive silence of the underground. They knew that their journey to safety was a long way to go, and that Jax, a good man, had just died for them. The tunnel pressed in on them, a living tomb of cold, damp rock. Each breath Lyra drew was a shallow rasp, the air thick with the cloying scent of minerals and decay. Douglas shifted his grip on the makeshift sling holding the twins, the weight of them a constant ache in his shoulders, a constant reminder of his responsibility. The twin with underdeveloped lungs, nestled closest to Lyra, whimpered softly. Douglas glanced at Lyra, her face pale in the dim, bioluminescent glow of the tunnel walls. Sweat plastered strands of her dark hair to her forehead. Her royal robes, once symbols of power, were now stained with grime and torn from their desperate flight. "We need to rest," Lyra gasped, her voice barely a whisper. Douglas scanned their surroundings. The tunnel offered no respite, only the relentless pressure of the earth. "Just a little further," he said, his voice strained. "I think I saw a wider section ahead." But the wider section turned out to be a cruel trick of the light. The tunnel had collapsed, a jumbled mess of rock and debris blocking their path. "Damn it," Douglas muttered, his shoulders slumping. Lyra leaned heavily against the tunnel wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Is there another way?" Douglas examined the collapse, searching for any sign of a passage. As he ran his hand along the rough-hewn stone, he noticed a series of strange symbols etched into the wall, almost hidden beneath a layer of grime. They weren't Andromedan. "Older, this tunnel. It's older than we thought," he said, tracing the symbols with his finger. "Another civilization used this place before." He worked quickly, clearing away enough of the rubble to reveal a narrow opening. It was a tight squeeze, but it was a way forward. After what felt like an eternity of crawling, they emerged into a hidden chamber. The air here was stagnant, but at least it was breathable. The chamber was circular, its walls lined with strange, pulsating crystals. In the center stood a towering structure of metal and glass, its purpose unknown. Ancient Andromedan technology long forgotten. "What is this place?" Lyra whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. Douglas approached the structure cautiously, his mind racing. He recognized some of the components: energy conduits, filtration systems, control panels, but their function was a mystery. He noticed a series of vents near the base of the structure, clogged with dust and debris. An idea sparked in his mind. He rummaged through his meager supplies, pulling out a piece of cloth and a small, handheld fan he'd salvaged from the escape pod. It was a long shot, but it was worth a try. Working quickly, he cleared the vents and rigged the fan to create a makeshift air filtration system. The structure hummed to life, the crystals glowing brighter as it began to draw in the stagnant air. Within minutes, the air quality in the chamber had noticeably improved. Lyra took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling with relief. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. Douglas smiled, his heart swelling with pride. Just a little human ingenuity. As Lyra rested, Douglas explored the chamber further. He noticed a series of intricate carvings etched into the far wall. It was a map, depicting a network of tunnels that snaked beneath the surface of Andromedan Prime. "Look at this," he said, beckoning Lyra over. "It shows a whole network of tunnels leading to different locations." Lyra examined the map, her brow furrowing. "One of these tunnels. It leads to the sanctuary." The sanctuary, a whispered legend among the Andromedans. A hidden refuge for those deemed genetically deviant, exiled by the Queen for their imperfections. "It's just a rumor," Douglas said, his voice hesitant. "A fairy tale to scare children. But what if it's real?" Lyra countered, her eyes filled with hope. "What if it's a safe place for us, for the twins?" Before Douglas could answer, a low rumble echoed through the tunnel. It was the sound of approaching footsteps, the unmistakable cadence of the Queen's forces. "They're coming," Douglas said, his voice tight with urgency. "We have to decide. Do we risk heading to the sanctuary, or do we stay here and fight?" Lyra looked at the twins, her face etched with worry. The weaker twin coughed, a rattling sound that echoed in the confined space. The other twin, its eyes closed, stirred slightly. As Douglas watched, he felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to adjust the sling. He hadn't even realized it was uncomfortable. But then, he looked at the twin, and it was as if it knew what he was thinking, as if it were anticipating his needs. The crystals around them pulsed with increased energy, and the ancient technology hummed even louder. Suddenly, a section of the wall shimmered and then dissolved, revealing a swirling vortex of light and color. A portal, Lyra gasped. What's happening? Douglas didn't know, but he knew they didn't have a choice. The Queen's forces were osing in, and something about the twins, something about their unique physiology, had triggered this. We have to go, he said, grabbing Lyra's hand. Now, he didn't hesitate. He stepped through the portal Lyra and the twins closed behind. The vortex shimmered once more, then vanished, sealing the portal behind them. They were stranded. The air in this new world was thick and heavy, laden with the scent of sulfur and decay. Towering, fungal-like structures loomed in the dim light, casting long, grotesque shadows. The ground was soft and spongy beneath their feet. Douglas scanned their surroundings, his senses on high alert. This place was wrong, twisted, unnatural, and then he saw them. They emerged from the shadows, their forms grotesque and distorted. Their skin was mottled and scarred, their limbs twisted and elongated. They were andromedans, but mutated. They snarled, their eyes burning with hatred and suspicion. They raised their crude weapons, ready to attack. Stay back, Douglas shouted, stepping in front of Lyra and the twins. But then one of the mutated andromedans hesitated. He stared at Lyra, his eyes widening in recognition. Princess? He croaked, his voice raspy and distorted. Confusion flickered across Lyra's face. Do I know you? We were exiled, the mutated andromedan said, his voice filled with bitterness. Cast out by the Queen for our imperfections. He gestured to the other mutated andromedans, their faces contorted with anger and resentment. We know the Queen's cruelty. We know what she does to those who don't fit her perfect mold. Another mutated andromedan stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with a strange intensity. There is a prophecy, he said, his voice low and ominous. It speaks of twins who will either save us or destroy us all. The mutated andromedans, their skin a patchwork of greens and browns that mimicked the surrounding foliage, guided them deeper into the canyon. The air grew cooler, the oppressive heat of the plains replaced by a damp, earthy scent. Water trickled down the moss-covered walls, feeding a hidden oasis bursting with strange, bioluminescent flora. This was their settlement, a sanctuary carved from the unforgiving landscape. They were led to a central clearing where dwellings were built into the rock face, their entrances draped with woven plant fibers. Two figures emerged from the largest dwelling, a tall, muscular andromedan with fierce, predatory eyes, and a smaller, more frail-looking female with skin the color of jade. Lyra, the warrior greeted, his voice a low growl. His name was Kale. He spat the name like venom. You dare bring outsiders into our haven. The jade-skinned female stepped forward, her eyes milky with age, focused on Lyra, then drifted to Douglas and finally settled on Lyra's abdomen. Welcome, child, she said, her voice raspy but kind. I am Zira. She paused. I sense a great change within you. Kale scoffed. Change? She brings only trouble. She is still a royal, is she not? A symbol of the Queen who exiled us to this wasteland. His gaze burned into Lyra. Lyra met his stare, her chin lifting slightly. I am not my mother, Kale. I came here seeking refuge and perhaps understanding. Douglas, meanwhile, discreetly observed the mutated andromedans. Their enhanced senses were evident in the way they constantly scanned their surroundings, their nostrils flaring as they sampled the air. Their limbs were longer and more powerful than those of the royal andromedans, their bodies honed for survival in this harsh environment. He noted the subtle differences in their musculature, the way their skin absorbed and reflected light. Lyra turned to Kale. I may not be one of you, but I know what it's like to be an outcast. Her voice softened, imbued with empathy. To be considered defective. Suddenly, a wave of warmth radiated from Lyra, followed by a blinding pulse of light. The mutated andromedans cried out, clutching their heads. Kale staggered backward, his eyes wide with pain. Even Zira winced, shielding her face with a trembling hand. Douglas, shielded mostly by Lyra, felt only a mild tingling. He looked at Lyra, concern etched on his face. What was that? Lyra stared down at her stomach, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. The twins. Kale, recovering, glared at them, his face contorted with rage. This proves it. They are dangerous. They must be exiled. Zira shook her head, her milky eyes regaining their focus. No, Kale, this is different. I felt their energy. It is chaotic, but also powerful. We must protect them, study them. They may hold the key to our future. The other mutated andromedans murmured amongst themselves, their faces a mixture of fear and curiosity. Douglas could see the division in their eyes. Some mirrored Kale's fear, while others seemed intrigued by Zira's words. Douglas stepped forward, his mind racing. Perhaps I can help, he said, his voice calm and measured. I am a xenobiologist. I can study their abilities and perhaps find a way to stabilize them. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I can't promise anything, but I can offer my knowledge. Zira studied him, her gaze piercing. Your knowledge? Yes, perhaps that is what we need. She turned to Kale, her voice firm. They will stay under my protection. Kale's teeth gritted. I will not let them endanger us. Later that evening, as the bioluminescent flora cast an ethereal glow over the settlement, Douglas was examining a sample of mutated andromedan tissue under a makeshift microscope. Lyra sat beside him, her brow furrowed with worry. Kale doesn't trust us, she said, her voice barely a whisper. No, Douglas agreed. He doesn't. Unbeknownst to them, Kale was lurking in the shadows, his eyes fixed on them with a burning hatred. He muttered to himself, his voice a low hiss. They will be the death of us all. I must act. Lyra, restless, wandered from their shared dwelling. She needed to be alone to think. As she passed Kale's dwelling, she overheard his low voice. Must be done tonight, before they spread their poison further. Lyra gasped, realizing Kale's intent. She ran back to Douglas, her heart pounding in her chest. Douglas, he's planning something. He wants to hurt us. Douglas grabbed a makeshift weapon, a sharpened piece of obsidian, and moved to stand in front of Lyra, shielding her. Kale burst from his dwelling, his face a mask of fury. You will not endanger my people, he roared, lunging at them. Suddenly, Kale froze mid-stride, his weapon clattering to the ground. He looked down in confusion, his hands twitching uselessly. Zira stepped forward, her face etched with disappointment. Enough, Kale. You would harm a pregnant woman and her unborn children. Kale snarled, his eyes filled with hatred. They are a threat. They must be eliminated. Zira raised her hand, stopping him. You have betrayed our trust, Kale. You are no longer welcome here. Before anyone could react, Kale vanished into the shadows, disappearing into the maze of dwellings. Douglas pulled Lyra close, his heart pounding in his chest. He'll be back, he said grimly. He won't let this go. Lyra nodded, her face pale. We're not safe here. They are being hunted by the Queen and now one of the mutants. What can they do? How can they keep their children safe? Douglas looked at Zira. We need to understand the prophecy, Douglas said. Who wrote it? What does it mean? What do the people believe about destiny and the future? Zira sighed, her face etched with weariness. Very well, she said. I will show you the ancient texts. But be warned, the truth may be more complicated than you expect. Zira, her usually stoic face etched with concern, placed a reassuring hand on Lyra's arm. The prophecy speaks of such anomalies, she began, her voice a low hum that resonated with the crystalline walls of the chamber. Twins born of two worlds who will either save or destroy the Andromedan people. Their arrival. It was foreseen. Holographic projections flickered to life, displaying ancient Andromedan texts filled with swirling nebulae and cryptic symbols. Douglas squinted, trying to decipher the alien script. Save or destroy. Sounds like a self-fulfilling prophecy to me, he muttered, rubbing his temples. Put enough pressure on kids, tell them they're destined for greatness or doom, and they'll probably deliver one way or another. He saw the influence these prophecies had on the mutated Andromedans. Lyra, however, seemed captivated by the images. Her sapphire eyes widened as she traced the glowing lines with a slender finger. "I feel a connection," she whispered, her voice barely audible. As if I meant to understand their destiny. As if on cue, a nearby energy conduit began to sputter and crackle, showering the room with sparks. Zira quickly deactivated it with a wave of her hand. "Their powers. They are manifesting more frequently now," she observed grimly. "We must be cautious." Days turned into weeks and the twins' latent abilities grew stronger. Small objects would levitate momentarily in their presence. Electrical devices would malfunction at their touch. The playful occurrences started to take on a darker edge. One afternoon, while the twins were playing near the edge of the settlement, a young mutated andromedan child wandered too close. A surge of energy erupted from one of the twins, sending a jagged piece of crystal flying. It struck the child's arm, leaving a deep gash. Panic erupted. Fearful whispers rippled through the settlement. Douglas, driven by a surge of protectiveness, threw himself into refining his device. He adjusted dials, tweaked circuits, and ran countless simulations, desperately seeking a stable setting that could suppress the twins' powers without harming them. Frustration mounted as his efforts yielded only temporary and inconsistent results. Meanwhile, Lyra grew increasingly withdrawn. She spent hours in quiet contemplation, her brow furrowed in concentration. When Douglas asked what was wrong, she hesitated, then confessed, "I've been having dreams, visions, glimpses of the future." She described scenes of unimaginable destruction, cities crumbling into dust, skies ablaze with fire, the Andromedan people scattered and broken. But amidst the chaos, she also saw flashes of unity and peace. Humans and Andromedans standing side by side, working together to rebuild a shattered world. The weight of these visions pressed heavily on her. "I don't know what it means, Douglas," she confessed, her voice trembling, "but I fear what's to come." Their fragile peace was shattered once again by the arrival of an unwelcome figure. Kale, his face contorted with hatred, strode into the settlement, flanked by a small group of loyal followers. "Zira," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the crystalline structures. "I have come for the twins. They are a danger to us all." He gestured towards the injured child, his eyes filled with righteous anger. "These abominations are a threat to our survival. They must be eliminated." Zira stood firm, her eyes blazing with defiance. "I will not surrender them, Kale. They are under my protection." A tense standoff ensued. The air crackled with unspoken threats. Douglas and Lyra stood shoulder to shoulder, their hearts pounding in their chests. They were outnumbered and outmatched, but they refused to back down. "We won't let you hurt them," Douglas growled, his hand instinctively reaching for the energy pistol at his hip. Realizing they were moments away from a full-blown conflict, Douglas activated his device. A low hum filled the air as the machine emitted a field of energy, enveloping the twins. Their movements slowed, their eyes glazed over, and the ambient energy fluctuations in the area subsided. "It's working," Douglas breathed, relief flooding his veins. But Lyra cried out, clutching her chest. "Douglas, stop! They're weakening." Kale, seizing the opportunity, lunged forward, his blade glinting in the dim light. "Now is our chance." Lyra, fueled by a surge of adrenaline, threw herself in front of the twins, her hands outstretched. A shimmering barrier of energy erupted from her body, deflecting Kale's attack. Her latent Andromedan abilities, dormant for so long, had finally awakened. As the energy crackled around her, Lyra was struck by a sudden, overwhelming vision. She saw two paths diverging before her, one leading to unimaginable destruction, the other to salvation. And at the end of each path stood one of her twins. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving her gasping for breath, her pupils dilating. One twin destined for destruction, the other for salvation. The weight of that knowledge was almost unbearable. She dared not tell Douglas the details of this vision. She was afraid of what Douglas may do. Suddenly, A deafening roar shook the ground. All eyes turned skyward as a massive ship descended from the clouds, its sleek, metallic hull glinting in the fading light. The Queen's sigil was emblazoned on its side. Reinforcements had arrived. The threat had escalated tenfold. The settlement was under attack. What could Douglas and Lyra do? Which vision would come to pass? And how would they choose between their children? Which vision would come to pass? The question hung in the air, unanswered as the ground began to tremble. A low, guttural roar echoed across the settlement, growing into a deafening cacophony as the Queen's ship unleashed its fury. Plasma cannons ripped through the air, vaporizing structures and sending debris raining down. Even as Lyra recoiled from the first blast, a different kind of chaos erupted within the settlement itself. Shouts of betrayal mingled with the sounds of battle as Kale's followers, cloaked until now, turned on their comrades. Energy weapons flashed in the narrow streets, cutting down unprepared defenders. Zira's voice, amplified by a makeshift comm system, cut through the din. Defenders, to your posts, seal the breaches, for the future. But even her unwavering commitment couldn't mask the desperation in her tone. The settlement's defenses, cobbled together and undermanned, were crumbling fast. Douglas grabbed Lyra's hand, his grip tight. We need to move, now. He scooped up one twin, Lyra the other, their faces etched with fear. They sprinted through the chaotic streets, dodging falling debris and stray energy blasts, towards a hidden bunker beneath the central plaza, a last resort, known only to a few. As they ran, Lyra's breath hitched. She stopped abruptly, her eyes wide with a chilling realization. Douglas, I saw it. I had a vision. One of them. One is destined for destruction, the other for salvation. Her voice was barely a whisper filled with anguish. Douglas stopped, his knees going weak. Prophecies, destiny, it felt like a cruel joke in the face of such brutal reality, but the genuine terror in Lyra's eyes was undeniable. Lyra, what are you saying? I don't know which one, she cried, clutching the twin in her arms tighter. But I saw it. One consumed by darkness, the other radiating light. Their choices, their very existence will shape the fate of our people. Douglas stared at the twins, his heart pounding. He didn't understand prophecies, didn't believe in predetermined fates. He believed in choices, in the power of individuals to shape their own destinies. We can't give up on either of them, he said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. There has to be another way, we'll find it. They reached the entrance to the bunker, a reinforced blast door hidden behind a crumbling facade. But their hope was short-lived. Standing before them, blocking their path, was Kale. His eyes burned with a fanaticism that chilled Douglas to the bone. It is as I saw, Kale said, his voice a low growl. The twins, their destinies are clear. One must be sacrificed to ensure the other's triumph. He gestured with a weapon, its barrel glowing ominously. I will not allow this settlement, this world, to be consumed by darkness. Lyra gasped, confirmation of her vision hitting her like a physical blow. Kale, no, you can't. Douglas knew he had only seconds. He ripped the device from his belt, the one he'd been working on, designed to disrupt Andromedan energy fields. It was a long shot, untested, but it was all he had. He activated it, the device emitting a high-pitched whine that resonated with the crystalline structures of the settlement. Distraction, he yelled, shoving Lyra towards the bunker entrance. Get them inside, I'll hold him off. Lyra hesitated, torn between protecting her children and staying by Douglas's side. Douglas, no, it's too dangerous. Go, he roared, firing the device. A wave of distorted energy pulsed outwards, disrupting the energy weapons of Kale's followers, causing them to momentarily falter. It wouldn't last long, but it was enough. Lyra, her face a mask of anguish, grabbed the handle of the blast door and pulled it open, disappearing inside with the twins. Douglas turned to face Kale, the weapon held firmly in his grasp. You cannot stop what is destined to be, Kale snarled, lunging forward. Douglas met him head-on. He wasn't a soldier, but he was a survivor. He fought with a ferocity born of desperation, dodging Kale's attacks and landing blows of his own. The fight was brutal, a whirlwind of energy blasts and desperate hand-to-hand combat. He managed to disarm Kale, sending his weapon clattering across the ground, but not before a searing energy blast tore across his chest. He staggered back, clutching the wound, his vision blurring. Even as he fought, the sounds of the attack intensified. The Queen's forces had breached the outer defenses and were closing in on the bunker. He could hear the crackle of energy weapons, the screams of the dying. Suddenly, the blast door behind him buckled inwards, showering him with sparks and debris. The Queen's forces were inside. Lyra stood in the doorway, desperately firing her own weapon, but she was hopelessly outmatched. The Queen's soldiers, clad in advanced armor, advanced relentlessly, their weapons trained on her, and the twins huddled behind her. Douglas, fueled by adrenaline and sheer desperation, stumbled towards them, activating the device again, channeling its energy to create a shimmering shield around Lyra and the twins. It was a desperate gamble, pushing the device beyond its limits. Then, a deafening roar shook the very foundations of the settlement. The Queen's ship, hovering overhead, unleashed a final, devastating blast. The energy beam slammed into the bunker, overloading Douglas's device, sending a surge of power coursing through his body. The world dissolved into blinding white light. The bunker collapsed, burying Douglas, Lyra, and the twins under tons of rubble. Silence descended, broken only by the crackling of residual energy and the groans of the wounded. Above, the Queen's voice, cold and imperious, echoed through the comm system. "Search the rubble, secure the twins, leave no stone unturned." But beneath the twisted metal and shattered stone in the darkness of the collapsed bunker, Lyra stirred. She was alive. The twins were alive, and miraculously a section of the bunker had remained intact, revealing a hidden tunnel, a secret escape route. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, Lyra crawled towards the tunnel, dragging the twins behind her. She glanced back at the rubble at the place where Douglas lay buried. Tears streamed down her face. She had to escape. She had to protect the twins. It was what he would have wanted. She disappeared into the darkness, leaving Douglas behind, his fate unknown. Lyra coughed, the metallic tang of Andromedan blood thick in her throat. Dust rained down from the collapsed tunnel entrance behind her, each particle a tiny tombstone for the life she knew. Grief clawed at her, a raw, animalistic pain for the home, for the future, for the hope that had been buried beneath tons of rock. But the twins, their soft, fragile cries cut through the despair. Resolute, she clutched them tighter, their tiny bodies nestled against her own. She had to get them out. Emerging into the alien twilight, Lyra gasped. This wasn't the familiar, carefully cultivated landscape surrounding the royal bunker. Jagged, obsidian peaks clawed at the sky, casting long, ominous shadows across a desolate plain choked with unfamiliar, phosphorescent fungi. She was lost. But the twins needed shelter, and fast. Her enhanced hearing picked up the faintest sound of rushing water in the distance, a potential source of life. Drawing on centuries of Andromedan survival knowledge, passed down through generations of her bloodline, Lyra scanned the terrain. The wind carried the scent of Pytheria, a rare, edible moss that grew only near subterranean water sources. And there, nestled amongst the jagged rocks, was a cluster of bioluminescent fungi, their soft glow hinting at a hidden entrance. A cave system. It was a risk, but it was their only chance. Days blurred into a desperate struggle. Lyra's body, still recovering from childbirth, strained under the demands of feeding 2 infants. Her milk, thin and watery, barely seemed enough to sustain them. Worry gnawed at her, a constant, agonizing ache. Were they getting enough? Would they survive? One night, exhausted and delirious, Lyra drifted into a fitful sleep. She dreamt of Douglas. He was standing in a field of earth flowers, bathed in sunlight, his voice clear and strong. "Lyra," he called, his image shimmering like a mirage. "Don't give up. They need you, I need you, keep going." The dream faded, leaving her with a flicker of revitalized commitment. Meanwhile, deep beneath the rubble, a hand, mangled and bleeding, clawed its way through the debris. Douglas gasped, his lungs burning with dust and smoke. Pain lanced through his left leg, a searing agony that threatened to overwhelm him. He was alive. Somehow, miraculously, but Lyra, the twins. Ignoring the pain, Douglas forced himself to crawl, his xenobiological ledge kicking in. He knew that shock could kill him faster than any physical injury. He needed to stabilize. Using strips of his torn uniform and fragments of the bunker's reinforced plating, he fashioned a crude but functional splint for his shattered tibia. The pain was excruciating, but he gritted his teeth, forcing himself to focus. Survival was paramount. Scavenging through the wreckage, he found a small cache of emergency supplies, nutrient paste, a water purifier, and unbelievably, a damaged Andromedan communication device. Hope surged through him, a fragile spark in the darkness. He worked for hours, his fingers numb and bleeding, painstakingly trying to repair the device. Finally, with a surge of power, the screen flickered to life, displaying a jumble of distorted symbols. He tried to send a distress signal, but the transmission was weak, fragmented, barely a whisper in the vastness of space. All he could get out were garbled bursts of static and a few recognizable phonetic sounds. Back in the Queen's citadel, the communication officer's head snapped up. "Your Majesty," she announced, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "We've detected a faint distress signal from the bunker's location. The transmission is heavily damaged, but we believe it might be Williams." The Queen's sapphire eyes narrowed. "Williams," she repeated, her voice a low, dangerous purr. "Alive, impossible, but intriguing. Intensify the search. I want him found, alive if possible. His knowledge could still be useful. Prioritize his capture over the retrieval of the offspring." But Cale heard the Queen's order, and a dark, twisted smile spread across his face. He no longer cared about the Queen's plans. His defeat had broken something within him, leaving behind only a burning obsession. He knew, with a certainty that bordered on madness, that Lyra and the twins held the key to his destiny. He would find them, regardless of the Queen's commands. He would reclaim his honor. Lyra, meanwhile, cautiously approached a small settlement nestled amongst the towering rock formations. Nomadic Andromedans, their faces etched with the harshness of the desert, eyed her with suspicion. They were wary of outsiders, especially those associated with the Queen. "Please," Lyra pleaded, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "I need your help. My home. It was destroyed. I have newborns. They need shelter." She carefully revealed the twins, their tiny faces peeking out from beneath her protective cloak. "They are different. Their heritage is unique. They deserve a chance." The nomadic Andromedans exchanged wary glances. They recognized the Queen's bloodline in Lyra, but the twins. There was something different about them, something compelling. After a long, tense silence, the leader of the nomads, a wizened elder with eyes that held the wisdom of centuries, spoke. "We offer temporary shelter, supplies, but trust is earned, not given, and the Queen's shadow stretches far." As Lyra settled into the nomadic camp, she discovered that these wanderers possessed a hidden knowledge, passed down through generations. Ancient Andromedan healing techniques, forgotten by the technologically advanced society of the Citadel. She hoped they could help her produce more milk, or at least tell her how to make a formula for the twins. One evening, the elder approached Lyra, her face grave. "The prophecy of the two," she said, her voice low and somber. "It is spoken of in whispers, feared by many, but you must understand. It is not a prophecy of destiny. It is a warning, a time of great upheaval, a time of choosing." Far away, Douglas, evading the Queen's search parties, stumbled upon an abandoned Andromedan research facility, half buried in the sand. He found a functional escape pod. Hope surged through him. He could get off this planet. He could find help. He could save Lyra and the twins. As he was about to climb inside, A figure emerged from the shadows, his face contorted with rage, his eyes burning with madness. Kale. Kale's armored fist slammed into Douglas's jaw, sending him sprawling against the cold metal floor. Stars burst behind his eyes, blurring the already disorienting landscape of the abandoned research facility. He tasted blood, metallic and thick. Kale loomed over him, a hulking shadow in the dim emergency lighting. "You should have stayed where you belonged, human." Douglas, scrambling back, remembered the training, the countless hours spent studying alien physiology. He aimed for the pressure point beneath Kale's mandibles, a vulnerable spot he'd identified in his xenoanatomy studies. A sharp jab, a surge of focused energy, and Kale staggered back, hissing in pain, momentarily stunned. It was a sliver of an opening, but enough. He lunged to his feet and sprinted down the corridor, the echoing clang of Kale's heavy boots a constant threat behind him. The facility was a maze of identical corridors and abandoned laboratories, a testament to a research project long since shut down. Douglas, however, had studied the blueprints obsessively. He knew the layout, the hidden passages, the emergency routes. He ducked into a side corridor, the air thick with the smell of ozone and decay. The corridor ended in a reinforced door, sealed with a biometric lock. He bypassed it with practiced ease, his fingers dancing across the control panel, inputting the override code he'd memorized weeks ago. The door hissed open, revealing a hidden laboratory untouched by time. Rows of stasis pods lined the walls, their interiors filled with strange, unidentifiable specimens. In the center of the room, a holographic display flickered to life, projecting a series of research logs. Douglas accessed them, his heart pounding in his chest. The logs detailed the Queen's research into andromedan genetics, specifically the manipulation of pheromonal production. And then he saw it, Lyra's name. His blood ran cold as he scrolled through the data. Lyra, as a toddler, had been subjected to a series of experimental treatments designed to enhance her pheromonal output. The treatments, instead, had crippled her ability to produce them naturally. Her defect wasn't a natural anomaly, it was intentionally induced. A wave of white-hot anger surged through him, eclipsing the pain from his injuries. The Queen hadn't been trying to help Lyra, she'd been experimenting on her, using her as a pawn in some twisted game. He had to warn Lyra, tell her the truth before it was too late. A metallic clang echoed from the corridor outside. Kale. He was running out of time. Douglas spun around, his mind racing. He needed a distraction, something to buy him time to escape. His eyes fell on a large containment chamber, its glass walls reinforced with energy fields. Inside, a hulking, multi-limbed creature stirred restlessly. It was one of the Queen's failed experiments, a bioengineered monstrosity deemed too dangerous to control. He didn't hesitate. He banged his hand against the emergency release, triggering a containment breach. Alarms blared, red lights flashed, and the energy fields flickered and died. The creature roared, its guttural cry shaking the very foundations of the facility. Kale burst into the lab, his weapon raised, but the creature was faster. It lunged, its razor-sharp claws tearing through Kale's armor. Douglas used the chaos as cover, slipping out of the lab and into the darkness. He didn't get far. A stray energy blast from Kale's weapon grazed his side, sending him crashing to the floor. He gritted his teeth against the pain, adrenaline masking the severity of the wound. He had to keep moving. Meanwhile, miles away, hidden amongst the rocky crags of Andromeda's northern frontier, Lyra cradled her twins. Their tiny mouths latched onto her breasts, but the milk flowed weakly, insufficient for two hungry infants. Desperation gnawed at her. She had to find a way to produce more milk, or they wouldn't survive. Following the instructions of the nomadic tribe's elder, Lyra sat beneath the twin moons, her hands resting on her swollen breasts. She focused her mind, picturing the life-giving fluid flowing freely, nourishing her children. It was an ancient Andromedan technique, passed down through generations, a way to tap into the planet's energy and stimulate milk production. She wasn't just sitting still, she was working. She was pushing her body beyond its limits to provide for her children. As Lyra practiced, she listened to the stories of the nomadic tribe. They were outcasts, hiding from the rest of Andromedan society because of their unique genetic traits. Yet they possessed a deep connection to the planet, a wisdom lost to the technologically advanced cities. Lyra shared her own story, her voice filled with vulnerability and tenacity. The tribe listened intently, their faces etched with empathy. They saw in Lyra a kindred spirit, someone who understood the pain of being different, the longing for acceptance. She showed them compassion, treating them as equals, not as outcasts. She helped them mend their clothes, tend to their wounds, and share her knowledge of human medicine. The leader of the nomadic tribe, a wizened woman named Zara, approached Lyra. "We are grateful for your kindness, princess, but know this, we hide from more than just societal scorn. We are hunted by the Purifiers, a faction who seek to eliminate all genetic anomalies, all those they deem unclean." Lyra's blood ran cold. The Purifiers. She'd heard whispers of their cruelty, their fanaticism. They were a threat to everything she held dear. Driven by desperation, Lyra activated an ancient beacon, a relic from a forgotten age. It was a signal for aid, a desperate plea to anyone who might be listening. The beacon pulsed with energy, sending a beam of light into the night sky. Unbeknownst to her, the signal reached far beyond the nomadic tribe's hidden camp. It pierced the veil of the atmosphere, alerting the Purifiers to their presence. The Purifiers mobilized, their ships descending from the sky like vengeful angels. They saw Lyra and the twins as abominations, a threat to their pure genetic lineage. They would stop at nothing to capture them and cleanse the planet of their impurity. Douglas, barely conscious, his vision blurring, forced himself to focus. He had to warn Lyra. He accessed the facility's emergency communication system, his fingers trembling as he input the override codes. He sent a faint, coded message, a series of encrypted coordinates, hoping against hope that Lyra would receive it. He collapsed, his world fading to black. Back at the nomadic camp, the tribe prepared for battle. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they wouldn't surrender without a fight. They were protecting their home, their way of life, and now Lyra and her twins. Lyra stood tall, her eyes blazing with defiance. She cradled her twins close to her chest, her heart filled with a fierce protectiveness. She was no longer just a princess. She was a mother, a warrior, a protector of the innocent. She would defend her children and the nomadic tribe with every fiber of her being. Far away, Kale, tracking Douglas's signal, picked up the Purifier's transmission. He recognized the coded language, the religious zealotry. He realized Lyra's location, the threat she faced. A cruel smile twisted his lips. He wouldn't let the Purifiers have her. He would capture Lyra and the twins himself, deliver them to the Queen, and finally earn her favor. He adjusted his course, aligning his ship with the Purifier's fleet. He would ally himself with them, use their strength to his advantage. He would betray them when the time was right. He was a predator, and Lyra was his prey. The ground trembled as the Purifiers unleashed their fury. Energy blasts ripped through the nomadic tribe's settlement, vaporizing tents and scattering debris. But the tribe, hardened by generations of survival in the harsh Andromedan wilderness, fought back with a ferocity that surprised their attackers. Energy weapons flared, and the air crackled with retaliatory fire. Through the chaos, Kale, his eyes burning with fanatical zeal, led a squad of Purifiers directly toward Lyra's location. For the purity of Andromedus, he roared, his voice amplified by his helmet's vox caster. The abomination must be purged. Suddenly, a figure stumbled into the fray. Douglas. He was battered, bloodied, but his eyes blazed with unwavering willpower. He raised a stolen Purifier rifle, firing wildly, drawing the enemy's attention. "Lyra," he shouted, his voice hoarse. Get out of here. A searing energy blast grazed his side, sending him sprawling. Ignoring his pain, Douglas scrambled to his feet. He had modified the purifier weapon, overloading its energy cells. He aimed it towards a cluster of purifier soldiers and unleashed a blinding surge of power. The weapon exploded in a shower of sparks, creating a momentary diversion as several purifiers were knocked off their feet. The weapon, however, was unstable, and as Douglas dropped it, it discharged again and sent him flying backward, the impact leaving him gasping for breath. Kale, brushing aside the stunned purifiers, finally reached Lyra. He seized her arm, his grip like a vice. "You will come with me, Lyra," he hissed. "The twins are an affront to our kind." Lyra recoiled, fear flashing in her violet eyes. "Let me go, Kale," she pleaded. "I loved you, Lyra," Kale snarled, his voice filled with bitterness. "I offered you purity and you chose this human." He gestured dismissively at the prone figure of Douglas. "These twins are abominations, and I will not allow them to taint our bloodline." Douglas, struggling to his feet, spoke, his voice strained but clear. "The Queen, she ordered Lyra's defect. She wanted this to happen." He gasped, clutching his bleeding side. "She needed a reason to control her." Kale's eyes widened in disbelief. Lies, the Queen would never. But Lyra's gaze hardened. Douglas's words resonated with a truth she had long suspected. A surge of anger and defiance coursed through her. With a strength born of desperation, she wrenched her arm free from Kale's grasp. "I am not yours to control, Kale," she declared, her voice ringing with newfound confidence. "And my children are not abominations. They are a symbol of hope." She lunged at Kale, striking him across the face with surprising force. He staggered backward, momentarily stunned. Douglas, ignoring his injuries, joined Lyra's side, his eyes locked on Kale. Inspired by their courage, the nomadic tribe surged forward, their energy weapons blazing. The tide of the battle began to turn. The purifiers, caught off guard by the tribe's renewed ferocity and Douglas and Lyra's defiance, faltered. Suddenly, the sky above crackled with energy. A fleet of Andromedan Council ships descended, their sleek hulls gleaming in the light of the twin suns. The Council had arrived. Witnessing the battle, they saw the chaos wrought by the purifiers, the tribe's valiant defense, and the unwavering commitment of Douglas and Lyra to protecting each other and their unborn twins. They saw a human and an Andromedan standing side by side, fighting for a future of unity. The Council ships unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, scattering the remaining purifiers. Kale, realizing the battle was lost, attempted to flee, but he was quickly apprehended by the arriving Council guard. The purifier leader, his face contorted with rage, was also captured. As the fighting subsided, Lyra clutched her abdomen, her face contorted in pain. "Douglas," she gasped. "The twins. They're coming." Amidst the wreckage of the settlement, a makeshift birthing chamber was hastily prepared. Douglas, his face etched with worry, held Lyra's hand, offering words of comfort and encouragement. After hours of agonizing labor, Lyra gave birth. First a son, his skin tinged with the violet hue of the Andromedans, but with a shock of dark hair and distinctly human features. Then a daughter, her skin a pale lavender, her eyes a familiar shade of human blue. The Andromedan Council, witnessing the vitality of the twins, their unique blend of human and Andromedan traits, were moved by the sight. They publicly acknowledged the bond between Douglas and Lyra, condemning the purifier's prejudice and vowing to protect the twins. Evidence of the Queen's manipulations, meticulously gathered by Douglas and his allies, was presented to the Andromedan Council. Faced with irrefutable proof of her treachery, the Council deposed her from the throne, stripping her of her power and influence. Her reign of deceit was over. In the aftermath of the battle, Douglas, Lyra, and their twins were celebrated as symbols of unity, ushering in a new era of cooperation between humans and Andromedans. The twins, a living testament to the power of love and acceptance, became a beacon of hope for a future where differences were celebrated, not feared. Standing beside Lyra, holding their children, Douglas looked out at the faces of humans and andromedans, united in peace. He had come to this planet as a captive, but he had found love, family, and a purpose beyond his wildest dreams. He had shown them that humanity's greatest strength was its capacity for compassion, ingenuity, and unwavering commitment to what is right.